Okay.
Okay, so I'll just say again, welcome
Yeah.
to Gen 2023, our fourth workshop on this topic. I'm the chair of this workshop. We do rotate the chair around this group of chairs. We've been together for a few years now. And I'm here at the University of Sydney for a semester, and happy to be chairing this workshop. I'll hand over to Justin.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I'm Justin Weiss. I'm a researcher and manager at IBM Research, and I'm coming from an HCI background, sort of into this AI space and studying how people collaborate with AI systems and co-create with AI systems. I guess Lydia is up next.
Yeah, Lydia.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Lydia. I'm a professor at Columbia. I'm supposed to be on maternity leave. I've got a sleeping baby right here. But this is just like not the time in life, if you're in generative AI, to go on maternity leave. So I am working harder and being more excited than ever. So yay that. And I'm super excited that we're, I don't know, that we were first 4 years ago, and excited you're here. Hendrik.
Hi, I'm Hendrik. I'm with IBM Research as well, and explainability lead of the MIT IBM AI Lab. I would call myself probably an early adopter of generative AI, so working in this field for a while now. I think it's really cool to be in a chat room where I'm not the only Hendrik, so I'm happy to see another one. Good to meet you all, and I'm handing it over to Werner.
Hi everyone, I'm Werner. I'm also at IBM Research. I'm a manager at IBM Research, also leading the human-centered AI strategy across the research division. And yeah, have been doing research around generative AI also for the past 4 years. I'm really excited about what's going on right now, and I'm very happy to meet all of you, and looking forward to a great workshop today.
Okay, thanks. We are going to give you a chance to introduce yourselves to each other in a few moments. We have a prompt you can see on the slide when we put you into breakout rooms. We thought if you introduced yourselves to each other in groups of 5, that would be better than trying to get through some, 20 to 50 people. But before we do that, let me just jump into the program with you and have a look at the plan for the day. So we have a keynote speaker. We'll be introducing him in just a few minutes, Philipp Schmitt, and he'll be talking about the chair project, among other things. And then at a glance, we are a 4-hour workshop, so it will go by very quickly, I think. We'll have just 5 minutes of breakout activity, followed by the keynote. We have a papers session for 15 minutes. At 7:15 for 1 hour. At 8:15, there is another set of breakout rooms. This is the coffee break or the bio break or whatever you want to call it. But we will put you in breakout rooms so that if you go get a cup of coffee and come back, you can chat with someone and you're not in a room full of people where the numbers are too big to figure out how to do that. Then we'll have another 1 hour paper session. And followed by a panel discussion. We've got a really exciting panel discussion plan for you. The papers are very interesting, so hang around. It's going to be fun. Now let me stop sharing. See if there's any questions about the program or what we're going to be doing. Is everybody okay? You have what you need? Because what I'll do now is put people into breakout rooms so you can talk to each other. You might start off with your name, and then what have you used generative AI before? If you haven't used generative AI, you can say, what have you read about, or what are you getting excited about? So let me see if I can find my breakout room. There we go. Welcome back. I'm sorry, I closed it a minute late, and then it took a minute to bring you all back. So we're 2 minutes into the keynote period. We'll let it go an extra 2. I'm going to ask Werner. Hendrik is introducing the speaker. So if you want to go ahead, you have the floor.
Cool. Thank you, Mary. Welcome also from my side. It's an honor to introduce Philipp Schmitt, and I keep it very short. So Philipp, as you will probably also hear from his accent, was born in Germany, as you might hear it from my own voice. But he's an artist and designer who's currently based in Brooklyn, actually around the world. I think he's a cosmopolitan in his mindset anyway. So you saw on the bio and also on his webpage that he's how he describes himself, that this creative practice engages him with philosophical, poetic and political dimensions of computation. And he has a lot of his work being presented and being exhibited in very prestigious places. A little side story. So I think I got to know Philipp 2018 at Neurops, and when we talked about what he's doing and what I'm doing, we both were a little bit coming from his side. We were not the hardcore AI people, but we were the like people who came into the field and were actually very warmly welcomed. What I like about his work is that whenever Philipp looks into a new technique, he is always going one step further, or at least one step further, to say that, than the obvious. And I think this is what I really like about his thinking, and you will see an example. And I have one more technical announcement, and then I think Philipp can start. So the technical announcement is, if you have questions during the talk, please put them into the Zoom chat. If you have questions after the talk, it's up to you if you're going to put them into the chat or make yourself known, and you can unmute yourself when being asked to unmute. With this, Philipp, I'm glad to have you here, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. So I'm just getting the windows in order. Okay, so yeah, I'm assuming you can see my screen. Henrik, thank you very much for the nice introduction. And thank you to the organizers for having me and everybody else for coming. It's an honor. Yeah, my name is Philipp Schmitt. I use he, him pronouns, and I am an artist and a designer. I'm not a machine learning researcher, and I'm also not an art historian, which would have come handy for this talk, you'll see. But I've made a lot of work the last few years around questions surrounding machine learning, probably since 2014 or so. So by not for that long by some standards, as I heard today. I wouldn't call it co-creation what I'm doing. But I definitely often use the technology and the unique maybe affordances it has to make art. And then often I'm working on projects that are not purely digital, and I'm using physical media or analog photography and things like that. And yeah, I thought I'm going to share a few examples of other work and then dive into one project more deeply. So on this table, there's a photo book that I made in 2016, 2017 or so, and it's called Computed Curation. And I came in this project in search of automation. So I wanted to make a photo book of my own archive of pictures that I had taken, probably 10,000 or so. And I thought, wow, this is exhausting already. Can I not automate this, making this book? And so I was learning about how to quantify composition and somehow aesthetics, and you quickly get to vectorization and t-SNE and machine learning and so forth. So I made this tool back then, which, yeah, you can sort of see there's some sort of embedding, and there's a line through all these pictures, which is how this book came together that you see on the table. This allowed me to, yeah, mostly generate the order of the book, but then also kind of inspired by that I was seeing, make little edits and remove something that bored me and so forth. But yeah, overall pretty automated. And then out of this, I printed basically this book. And what was interesting is that it became a pretty unique experience for a photo book. So yeah, like how you'd have these like really endless, this was 30 meters long, the whole thing. So you have like a very long stream of kind of meandering, very similar things that these algorithms picked up in these pictures. And yeah, I think it was fascinating, and also kind of changed to this day, I feel like, a little bit how I think about stuff. A lot of my work, I work very much based on these associative connections that I think I learned from computation. I didn't think back then that this was like a co-creative process or anything, but I would say maybe by today's standard, there was definitely some sort of something like that going on to some extent, even if not with deep learning. This is a different body of work. This is a picture called Toilet Sink Frisbee, and it's from a series that I call Tunnel Vision, where I shot analog photos that depict multiple objects in multiple categories in the COCO dataset. Because this is how this dataset was constructed. So the researchers came up with a list of object categories, and then they scraped Flickr for images that contain multiple instances of these categories. And yeah, this is the kind of the worldview that gets embedded in this data set. COCO, I mean, this is also ancient. But yeah, here's another one. And this again, I think helped me, like I like to set up a framework based on some technology or principle that I learn about that helps me see things in a different way. And yeah, I think that's something that's important for creative collaboration in any medium, is that you set up a good system to be creative in. And yeah, computational logic has been that system for me many times. Another area that has interested me for as long as I've worked with machine learning is how we represent these systems. So how researchers visualize neural nets, and how then the visualizations and those concepts influence the researcher's own mental model again, which then must kind of contribute to how they do the next thing, so that there's a sort of back and forth in that imagination and subjectivity. This project is called Why Would You Want to Picture It? And it's a sculpture of a neural network diagram that I took from a research paper and then welded in steel. You can write in the chat if you recognize this. This network. This is another ancient technology. But the sculpture was 3 meters long, and it's actually also 3-dimensional. And what you can't see in these pictures is that there's also a voice in this gallery that is describing the experience of being a vector inside this network. And it talks about the composition of the landscape and its rules and the poetry in that. And to write that monologue, I used quotes from different sources in my own writing. And then I also trained a CNN on these quotes to generate more text that then I incorporate into this project. And I think in this case, that generative system really helped me vocalize some of the strange qualities that I wanted to communicate. And yeah, this is, I think, online on my website if you wanted to listen to that. Okay, so I'm slowly going to get to what I'm actually wanted to talk about. So when Henrik reached out and asked if I want to talk about the chair project, I was really surprised, because this is like 2018 that I started doing this, and so much happened since then, and it feels like 2 decades ago. The sculpture that you just saw, the eagle eyes might have spotted, the network was DC-GAN. This is what this project was based on, and that is, I think, maybe the most important GAN, generative adversarial neural network, that ordinary people and artists had access to then, sort of, if you had a fast computer. And with DCGAN, you could generate images of 128 by 128 pixels, I think. Before that, it was 64, but then an artist came up with a way to add a layer, which, yeah, so suddenly we could do 128. That was pretty sharp, those pictures. And yeah, I want to talk about this project and then hopefully bring it to today at the end, if I can. So back then was also in like media arts when the first GAN machine learning generated artworks like made a splash. So Mario Klingemann, whose work you're seeing here, was one of the pioneers there. And yeah, artists started exhibiting these GAN images, and they were pretty new. Because you had these, usually they were representational and depicting real life objects. And that was, I think, pretty rare in computer generative art before that. And they were also pretty, I don't know, visceral, and they had these evocative qualities. Like it was drawn with organic brushstrokes and textures, and you had these surreal, I don't know, creatures and objects in them. And yeah, that was exciting. And I think that low resolution then, this was a technical constraint, but it's also something I kind of miss more and more. Because yeah, you have to squint to look at this, and it helps, it's good for the imagination. That kind of art reminded me of other artworks I've known from 100 years earlier, or not quite in this case, but here you have a painting by Max Ernst, a German surrealist painter. And I thought that I mean, it was similar visually in what they depicted, these kind of categories of artworks. But I also thought the connection was interesting because I knew that the surrealists were also pretty interested in generative tools, but they didn't have computers. And they used a lot of techniques that are called automatism. This painting was made with one of those techniques called decalcomania. This is something you might have done in, I don't know, in kindergarten. It's like you take a piece of glass or I don't know, a flat surface, and then you put some paint on it, and you press it on a sheet of paper, and then you wiggle it around, you pull it off, and you get these like wavy textures. You can see that, I think, here in this dress maybe. And yeah, Max Ernst used those techniques and probably painted over some areas and worked with this generative process. On the left, another recent generative work by Sasha Poflep, Carnivore. And on the right is another Max Ernst painting. In physiology, the term automatism describes like automatic body movements. So for example, we don't usually control our breathing. That just happens, and automatisms are supposed to do something like that for making art. The surrealist movement came or emerged in France after World War I, maybe out of the Dada movement, which was also a reaction to just the carnage that a lot of these artists who also served as soldiers in that war experienced. And the surrealists, their mission, they proclaimed, was to resolve what they thought was a contradiction between reality and like dream life, the subconscious. And they were really interested in psychoanalysis to stimulate their art. And they believed that the creativity that's in your, like deep in your subconscious is more powerful and more authentic than any like conscious rational thought. This movement also spread globally, especially or in part because a lot of the artists had to flee from the rise of fascism in Europe and the Nazi regime. So a lot of them emigrated to the Americas. Yeah, Max Ernst and Salvador Dali are some of the famous dudes in that movement. But it was international, and especially in Latin America, there was many influential women artists as well. So Frida Kahlo is associated with surrealism. Leonora Carrington, whose painting is you're seeing, was a member of the movement. And one of my probably most favorite surrealist artworks ever is this by Merritt Oppenheim. It's called Object from 1936. And yeah, I love how this could easily be made by, I don't know, Midjourney or something today. And we would put in something like a photo of a teacup, saucer, and spoon made of rabbit fur on a blue tablecloth. And then we would post it on Twitter and get 1 million likes. And yeah, that kind of thing. So yeah, this is really intriguing artwork for me. But back to the automatism. So one other technique that every kindergartner tends to know again is called frottage. So this is a technique that Max Ernst kind of developed and is famous for. I'm sure someone else has done that at another point in history, but he got the credit. And it's you've done it. You put a piece of paper again over a surface, but the kids do it on a coin, and then you rub with a pencil and you get the texture of that object, of that surface, rubbed through your paper. And yeah, if you want to put it in different language, you could say that you're creating a representation of the distinct features in this texture. And I think training a generative model you could maybe see that in a similar way. So we start with a data set, and then the network, the model creates a representation of the distinct features in the data set. And fittingly, you can also represent all of this as a topology. So I thought just there were some interesting parallels. Max Ernst published his experiments with frottage in 1926, is a while ago, in a publication that's called Natural History. And yeah, this is a drawing from that portfolio. You can see this, it's not just like him rubbing his paper on a coin or a tree or whatever, but he really worked on the pictures. And you see these fantastic landscapes and creatures, and the drawing is quite precise, inspired what Max Ernst must have seen in a piece of wood. Or I think this ocean at the bottom here looks maybe like a I think they call it chicken wire in the US, something like that. And yeah, so what interested me is that frottage, the automatism, the generative process, was at the start of a creative process and not at the end. And so that, yeah, like I said, the artists, they drew over the generative output, inspired by the prompt of that material. Maybe he erased some sections or drew over others again to kind of like bring out a vision that this abstract texture prompted in the subconscious, I guess. And that, I think, was decisively different from the GAN machine learning art that I had seen then, where people were just starting to experiment with the medium, and the generative output was the end of the process usually. So here, this is beautiful art by Sofia Crespo. And yeah, and I guess back then I thought, unfortunately, this is finite, this is the end. And so I wanted to create a project where I would use machine learning at the start of a creative process and not at the end. And in this like whole, that's why I'm going on about this whole surrealism thing, inspired by this technique, like, can we use GANs as automatism to stimulate the imagination? This project was a collaboration with Steffen Weiss and Mikkel Mikkelsen, two industrial designers and good friends of mine. And we started this in about 2018, I think, trying to come up with a case study for this approach. And so I decided to make a chair. Why a chair? The chair is, I think, the archetype of the designed object. That's like, it's the thing. And that's not just because we all like to sit and it's fun to design or something, but there's a long history in furniture design of using chairs as a device to materialize like a new design philosophy or a new or like aesthetic or political ideas or material possibilities. So like you take something that everybody already knows and you can thereby like really train the eye on one thing that changed. And back then is 2018. You actually had to train again from scratch. So I produced this data set of classic 20th century chair designs that I scraped from Pinterest. What makes them classics? A lot of these are like in a mid-century aesthetic that you would find on Pinterest by European designers. It's a very biased collection of data. It's very white, very European, very modernist in the thinking of these professionals. And yeah, I guess today many of them are mass produced and stripped of whatever like intellectual background they might have had. But this is the data set I used. And I used it to train this DC-GAN to make chairs. I think this was about 600 images in this data set. And then, this resulting model could generate new images. That was too small, way too small for a data set even then. But for me, that was fine because I didn't want to create like a functional piece of furniture. And I didn't want to create, these engaging semi-abstract prompts, like visual prompts for a human designer to then be creative with. And yeah, in these chairs that I made, I'm sorry, this is probably flashing a bit fast, but some are barely recognizable as furniture. A lot of other ones are not really functional. Maybe they're missing a leg or a seat. And there are other ones that are really concrete, probably overfit on something and remind of one icon or fit in a style or a manufacturing process. So that was interesting to look at. It also wasn't the first time anyone has used a generative technique for designing objects. So one popular example then was by Autodesk, a program called Dreamcatcher, which was generative 3D modeling. But that was often very driven by functional requirements, like give me the chair with the maximum stability at lowest weight. When I liked what I was seeing, I stopped the training. And yeah, again, on the left, you have some of the outputs from this model. And I invited a friend of mine, Steffen Weiss, who is an industrial designer, to draw the chairs that he saw in the pictures. And the idea was not to like trace what the image is, to make it like, not to vectorize it and not to also transform them into like furniture we could sell. But I asked him to bring out the chairs that what he saw in these images. Here's a few more of those examples. And I think like seeing the chair in that blurry, noisy GAN output is a really like an imaginative and associative process. It helps that you already know the subject matter. And it pushes the designer away from how they maybe would usually think about a project like this. And you might get to more unusual ideas that you might not have had otherwise. What's also crucial is that like methods like trying to sketch a three-dimensional object or maybe 3D modeling it, etc., that it introduces limitations and challenges that the AI did not face. For example, creating a believable perspective. And that is an opportunity, again, for like thinking imaginatively and solving all these little problems. And for all of that, I think it's crucial that these images are so blurry. As a next step, I built miniature prototypes on 4 of Steffen's designs or sketches, sorry, that spoke to me. And again, it's the same story, like the physical world really gives you a whole nother layer of constraints and little problems to solve, like material properties, and also very importantly, gravity. That's a big one. And yeah, you have to answer all these questions, like what is this made of? How do I make this joint? Will this stand or will it fall over? What tools do I need? How should the parts look like that I cannot see in this image? And yeah, all of that, solving all of that is really fun, and it helps you, it makes you be creative. Because those were so small, I also had to build a lot of little jigs and tools to make the objects. So here you can see like a little, a jig to bend the plywood for the backrest of the seat. And yeah, this is all like miniature Wonderland version of a real wood shop. And it was it was a lot of fun. And then here you have the 4 chairs that I built. For me, it's interesting that they are all clearly recognizable as furniture, but then one of them doesn't have a seat, 2 of them don't have a seat. There's another one that has 2 backrests, and yeah, I don't know, you don't need that, but they're very believable, like they're very humble, they're not crazy sci-fi, and yeah, that was very interesting to me then, or it still is. And then here is just a different view, a comparison of going from the generated output to a sketch by a human designer, and then a maquette or scale model by another person. And then here is for scale. So eventually I got a grant from the Museum of Applied Arts in Austria, in Vienna, for an exhibition. And that grant allowed us to bring in another friend of mine, Mikkel Mikkelsen, who is a Danish designer and furniture maker, and allowed us to commission Mikkel to build full-scale, real, if you want, models based on the generated chairs and drawings. And so, yeah, the next part is all objects made by Mikkel and then a few specialist craftspeople in Denmark. And in a way, it's the same story, but at much larger scale. Like at each step, you have all these constraints that you have to get around. So to bend wood like this, you need steam and pressure, unlike inside the neural network. And some things the GAN came up with, you kind of have to, they're only possible to make using CNC milling, but then joined with like traditional or hand-built joinery. And so in its ignorance, this AI tool prompted a lot of creative challenges. Mikkel is, I think, an incredibly crafty maker and prototyper, and this I'm pretty sure was a challenging project in the best possible way, and he had a lot of fun. If you've ever turned around your chair, your kitchen chair, I don't know, you probably have these corner blocks. That's a standard way to join a seat. But again, never saw those because that's never in the images. And there's just a lot of, like a million of these decisions that when you're making them, you're also bringing your own knowledge from other experiences and maybe best practices. And yeah, there's a lot of places where you can, I'm saying the same thing over and over, make different decisions and take different turns to make this process yours. I think one thing that's very important for creativity, which in my opinion, is especially apparent when you're teaching students, is that you set up like a set of constraints that give enough freedom to the individual to succeed and be creative, but also set the constraints right to help them succeed. And this approach that we took here, I think, was very conducive to that. What shadow does it cast? Also interesting question that the computer didn't need to think about. Or how you bend plywood. And yeah, this is a picture of the finished chair. This one is woven with this traditional Danish paper cord weaving technique. A lot of mid-century Danish chairs have that. And the weaver who we worked with loved this project because it was such an unconventional challenge. They thought it was funny. And I don't know, maybe they also liked that they could invoice like 2 backrests on one chair. But in any case, I think it shows that introducing AI also in craft can be done, and it can be fun if it's done in the right way, and it doesn't have to be daunting, even for somebody who usually doesn't work with technology at all. Here's another one from generated chair to final result. This is my favorite of all of them. And then on this one, yeah, this is also interesting. I think it's a very unconventional way to attach legs to your chair. It's very impractical, very unstable, but it's fun to work on, and it makes the seat platform almost float off the legs. I think aesthetically it's very interesting. This I wanted to highlight because this is probably the one thing it generated that might be useful, like a chair that you could sort of lean on during a boring Zoom talk or something like that. Yeah, it might be worth exploring if you actually wanted to bring something to market. And on that note, yeah, like my chair project was more artistic, but I've been like a few educators have reached out to me over the last couple of years who wanted to use this approach in their classes. And this is work by Dustin McDermott, who is a master's student at Kansas State University. And this work was done in a furniture design class by Professor Jinhua Lin. And they did a more practical approach. So the students worked with the same images and kind of selected ones that they found interesting in terms of, let's call it product innovation. And then you see the student, Dustin, created this chair that can be combined into like rows for larger groups to sit, and took those towards more functional innovations. Yeah, and here again, they are the 4 of them. I guess like looking back, and I think like any history, it's a bit of a caricature, but you can say that before the 19th century, you had maybe this craftsman designer, often a trained furniture maker, and then they build a unique chair themselves. In the Industrial Revolution, design became more and more separated from production. So the industrial designer designed the chair, and then they give specifications to a producer who then mass produces thousands of identical copies. In the late 20th century, you have computer-aided design, which becomes important to design machine-supported and also optimized for machine production. And then today, I think that is mostly still true. Maybe the materials and the production methods, all of that has advanced and diversified. Though, to summarize what I tried to do and what we tried to do was to turn this around, to use technology, automation, machine learning, not as optimization for mass production, but as an early step in the design process to stimulate the imagination. And so we use the scan to generate these surprising or evocative or inspiring prompts, something that a human maybe would not have come up with to, I think, augment the imagination. This was a few years ago, and I think since then we've seen that approach in other places. I think in fashion, I've seen it the first, and this is becoming more and more a thing. And I'm expecting that that will continue. And this is it on chairs. Okay. Check my time. So the last part is the hard part. To try to contextualize this a little bit. I don't know. I think a lot has happened in the last year or 2 years or 1 week. And I don't know if you saw they released GPT-5 this morning. No, that's a joke. But I did think a few weeks ago that, oh, maybe I'll like make this joke that I generated the Keynote with GPT-3, and then now this is outdated already, so I thought I can't do that anymore. And I think the last week I couldn't even go on Twitter because it's all a bit much. And I'm curious later to hear how you're feeling. But since I had to say something, I thought, what do I say? I'm really struggling to form an opinion on what's happening in this space. And I really look forward to the panel discussion on the topic on large models and co-creation later. But for the sake of trying to say like something interesting, I thought I would make an argument for less. And to me, the discourse I'm seeing on social media right now, it feels different. It's not anymore like, look at this strange thing. I'm talking about artists talking amongst themselves. Look at this strange thing. And now it's more, look, this algorithm can tell me how I can make a passive income online. And it even gave me a performance review. So we are like really impressed with the humanness of this. And it's inspiring business ideas left and right, and most about automation. And personally, like I am concerned about automation displacing jobs, or maybe at least diminishing working conditions in some way. But I don't know where that's going to go. I think there might probably be incredible conveniences coming our way, but I also don't know how that's going to go. But I thought about creativity and the co-creation, or in the sense that I've been doing it maybe. And I think I'm a bit skeptical that this like large model trend is equaling better co-creative partners. And I don't know, it's just an idea. But what I mean is, this is a recent project by Joss Fong and Aaron Filkey for Space 10, which is an innovation lab by IKEA. And as part of another like video work, which is beautiful, they generated these chairs, which are also beautiful. And what I'm thinking is they don't leave much for the imagination. So this left chair is clearly, or I'm guessing for me, it's a plastic chair. The right one is probably metal tube wrapped in vinyl sheets. Both chairs are made from fossil fuel then. And they're beautiful, and it's an impressive technically, but there's not much for me to do if I wanted to interact with this. These would also be really hard to build by hand. The left one especially, you can't do that at home. And they illustrate mostly the capabilities of the software, not the designers themselves. And to paraphrase Annie Dorson, all the important decisions are already made. This is a quote from an article called AI is plundering the imagination and replacing it with a slot machine. So what I'm trying to say is I think we're getting things maybe wrong a little bit, in that these prompts that we can put into these systems yield extremely sophisticated outputs. But what I want is the system to prompt me. And in that sense, I think there was something more interesting about the blurry 2016 GANs, not necessarily my work, but because they were so bad and so low resolution and so blurry, and when you worked with text and you generated text, then the grammar was off and it didn't really make sense, but the rhythm was interesting. And all of these things, I think, maybe importantly, you couldn't really use them as is, because yeah, you can't print that tiny thing and put it in a gallery, for example. But since then, the models have gotten much larger and much better, and today you can generate like a photorealistic chair and prose that's indistinguishable or better than my own writing, probably better. And what I'm trying to say with less is that I think with more resolution and clarity, the potential decreases for it to be evocative. And so I'm thinking maybe rather than trying to make this most sophisticated AI collaborator, we should try to make the least sophisticated, the minimum viable collaborator, if you want. I think that an AI system that gives me superpowers, which is in the description for this workshop, an AI system that gives me superpowers will do less because it's just also not fun if too much is being done for you. Like if I'm taking a cross-continental flight, I do not feel like I can fly. And this quote is in a similar vein by Molly Crabapple in the LA Times. Art is not scrubbing toilets. It's not an unpleasant task. Most people would rather have the robots do. It's our heart. We want to do art's work. Similarly, I think the same goes for software engineering, where there's crazy stuff happening. I think ChatGPT can write an entire program for you, but I think what's fun is programming yourself and like coming up with an elegant solution and having another human appreciate it and maybe being smart on Stack Overflow. And I doubt that this technology, like the changes we're seeing, that they make programming jobs more fulfilling in the long run. They might make them more productive, but I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we hope to get a 4-day work week out of this. Less is also more accessible. So things like control, malleability, customization of your tool, of their tools, that's very important for artists. And so smaller, simpler systems are easier to control and cheaper to access and cheaper to maintain. And with the large models that are dominating the conversation right now, as you know, I think only the biggest players can train these models, and we rely on them to give us access, and then they will turn this off at their whim. And yeah, it's not great, I think. In the same vein as this tweet about OpenAI's transparency regarding GPT-4, I think it's funny because there was a lot of interest in the black box for a few years, especially in artists engaging with machine learning, and we were all obsessed with the mathematical obscuring understanding, but really it's just a corporate black box, and OpenAI will not share what's in the model. I think real collaboration depends on seeing eye to eye. Another reason why I believe in less is that a lot of the problems with this technology, or with any technology, come, I think, as a side effect of aspiring to do more. So we're seeing this gold rush right now, and big companies are competing to gather the most data, the fastest, and train the largest model to get ahead of someone else. And then because that slows you down, you dissolve or restructure your org to get the responsible AI teams not complaining, and you push out critical voices, which is maybe more crucial than ever now that this is so much entering the public and people start to use it. Less is also better because enormous amounts of energy are used to train and run these models. I'm probably not saying anything new, but it's only going to rise maybe drastically if, for example, you'll put this in a search engine so that billions of people can use this every day. There's analysis that training GPT-3 emits 550 metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is me flying a round trip from New York to San Francisco, also 550 times. It's not maybe that much on the grand scheme of things if we had other times, but last week the IPCC released their final report on global warming, and we're currently on a trajectory of 1.5 degrees warming, not by the end of the century, but by the mid-2030s. We could still shift course if we say took drastic action, but I highly doubt that the solutions of the climate crisis are going to be AI generated. And so I think driving this technology for corporate profit is actively contributing to a less livable future. I'm saying all these things that everybody has read already because I think this will matter to artists. Artists are very attuned to the politics of their materials and the artifacts they're using. I know not everybody is working on tools for artists, creative tools for artists, but this should matter to us who make tools like this to model good behavior. And if you want to have good people use your stuff. I think right now for me, the ultimate irony in this space is that generative AI is described as like this tool to democratize creativity and things like that. But then we all know it's built on non-consensual data collection of like the unpaid labor basically of creatives on the internet who put their drawing on DeviantArt because they like community, and the kind of the cheap offshore moderators and labelers and so forth. So yeah, I think maybe let's do less of that too. I thought it would be good if I ended on a chair. So a lot of design, which is the profession I went to school for and that I practice for money, a lot of design of the last century or two has fueled consumerism, has designed wasteful products and helped create desire and demand for unsustainable lifestyles. But there's also other examples, and I think this chair is maybe embodying this idea of less. This is by the Italian designer Enzo Mari from 1974, and it's from a line of furniture called autoencoders, which translates loosely as self-design. Apparently, you cannot really translate it, but I can't tell you what the nuance is. But yeah, it's a series, and there's chairs and a bed and a table and a wardrobe and other furniture. But it's furniture that anyone could make from ubiquitous materials. So you can see it here. Like this is like you need a couple of wooden planks and then a hammer and some nails, and then you can build this chair. Mari also didn't like sell these chairs, but it was a material that a manual that he handed out for free. And it had not just an assembly manual, but it consisted of detailed blueprints how to make this thing. And it was like pedagogical, and it invited the maker, not the customer, to make modifications or to come up with like different pieces of furniture, different furniture. I think it was co-creation. I also think it's not anti-industry or anti-technology, it's open source. And it was, these pieces are solid, they're practical, they're easily repairable, they're affordable, they're collaborative, reproducible. They may be a bit boxy, I'll give you that. There's an article about this project by Francesco Milan, art historian, and they write, this was a powerful antidote to the obscurity of contemporary production processes and their products, which are usually conceived in such a way that the technologies, skills, supply chains, and forms of labor to realize these objects remain largely invisible to the final users. Rather than adopting an IKEA-like prescriptive approach to DIY, Autoproduzione encourages its participants to experiment freely with techniques and materials either by introducing variations to the designs or realizing different items altogether. And I want to end on this chair. I think let's create systems that are less like an IKEA flat pack and more like Enzo Mari's chairs. And with that, yeah, thank you very much for listening. And I'm excited about all the papers and authors we'll get to know today and the interesting questions you all have tackled. Thank you.
I'm trying to create the audio over the clapping, but you know how well this works. Thank you, Philipp. That was really cool. I'm very happy to have witnessed your talk and your thoughts, and I wrote down a lot of stuff. I'm not going to put myself first too much in questions. I mean, let me go through the chat a little bit. First, I think you gave a heart attack to most of the participants when you talked about GPT-5. So that was well placed, and it achieved its effect. Then I'm asking Michael, because you had a quite lively chat. Do you want to talk yourself? I mean, I can read it out, but probably not in the meaning that you can do it yourself. Michael Muller.
I don't have a, well, I'll offer one small point of view, but really it was a wonderful conversation in the chat that was very much in response to a wonderful keynote. So first of all, thank you. One thing that struck me was the number of transformations that we go through. And I'll use the example that I wrote in the chat. We do some sort of transformation to the data as we feed them into a GAN or before we feed them into the GAN. We do a less obvious transformation when we write the algorithm in the GAN. The GAN then performs a transformation internally that is partially determinate and partially not. When it makes an outcome, an instance, there's another translation. Then I think it was Stefan made a drawing, which is another translation. And then Philipp made a scale model, which was another transformation. And then interestingly, we saw the shadow cast by those models, and the choice of the angle of the sun and the angle of the backdrop that caught that shadowed image was yet another interpretation and translation. So there's translations that humans did deliberately. There's translations that humans did not very deliberately. Often data work we don't realize how much intellectual work we are doing when we make data fit for purpose. We do a huge amount of human interpretation as we do that. Blah, 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 see our papers, blah, blah, blah. So there's just all this string of interpretive actions of different kinds. And I'm not sure what to make of that, except that that's so interesting. There, that wasn't a useful comment, but I found your talk so interesting. Thank you.
Okay. I thought for me the most engaging part, or something that I wrote down multiple times, is the inversion of the principle. Because right now people think, when they think about a generative co-creation process, as the human prompting an AI. And I really like that you inverted that and say, like, okay, I want an AI that prompts me, where the AI tells me, or like gives me inspiration of what I want to do next. And I think this is really interesting and very nice thought. And I think it's also what's the engaging part about the chair project. Yeah, that the AI created an artifact, and through interpretation, but even through, I would call it engineering. Yeah, when you said that all of a sudden you have to face gravity. Yeah, of course, it's nothing the AI necessarily thinks about. That was really cool. I was wondering, so in computer graphics, there used to be a little bit of a trend of like creating photorealistic renderings of these wireframe models, etc. And then all of a sudden there was the counter movement starting, which was called non-photorealistic rendering. And especially for the reasons that you mentioned, saying like, we want to be more abstract. We don't want to give you concrete examples. There are even businesses who said like, if we have the concrete instantiation, it hurts us because like a little example of some company that builds oven and they make renderings of your house with the oven in your house, and all of a sudden it creates this hope that it will look like it, and then you see the oven and it's installed and it doesn't look like it at all. Yeah, so that you needed the abstraction even for a business. So do you see any way to get there? I mean, besides formulating a prompt saying, give it to me as a stroke image, or is there, or give it to me as a 128 times 128 pixel image? Do you see any other thing that would be interesting in this field to try?
I think one thing that interests me a lot is taking it out of the computer. And yeah, I'm not sure if that's going to be like a good answer here, but this is where my head went first. I think, yeah, thinking of this, maybe this like interaction with the system, not purely as happening on the computer screen. I don't know, maybe we can print and scan it again, or maybe we can play it on an old CRT monitor. I think one aspect of why this is a different type of work, but why I'm drawn to analog photography when doing work about like high-tech digital tools is because it's an interesting contrast and it looks different than the thing you see 100 times. So yeah, that I mean, maybe that is an avenue. Maybe you can project it onto a wall and then project it on a mirror or whatever. I don't really know. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Mary raised her hand.
Yes, thanks for your talk. It was really fascinating and very thought-provoking. I liked at the end where you took a turn into all of the issues that we're seeing that are ethical, moral concerns that lots of people have, except the people who are building the systems. They're walking away from that. But I wanted to come back to this human interpretation conversation that was going on in the chat while you were talking, where Lydia was pulling up examples of generated images that were matching sort of what you were showing, but still acknowledging that it's about human interpretation when it comes to art, and maybe everything, but particularly in art, it's the interpretation. And that's there's something very human in that. Even if we do get AI to interpret, there's something very human in recognizing that that's what we're doing. But I wonder, from the artist's perspective, are you, put the moral and ethical issues aside, although they shouldn't be put aside, are you worried that this next generation of AI will make people less interested in that human aspect of art because it's easy to do, easy to generate?
I don't know. Maybe one tangential thought is, I recently rediscovered my childhood hobby of playing the piano, which I abandoned for I don't know, 20 years in the middle. And I happened to, I had the chance to play on a real piano for a while, and now I'm back in my tiny apartment and this would just never work. There's no space and the neighbors would get driven up the wall. And so I bought this electric one that you can play with headphones. And there is just so much missing in this experience, because a piano, you feel it in your tummy, and the air vibrates. And even if I turn this digital one all the way up, it does not feel like like that analog experience. So I think the same with other arts. Like a painting is three-dimensional. There's like layers of stuff on top of each other. And when you draw yourself, you have like a pencil and the paper, and there's a friction. It's not two-dimensional. And so I'm not really worried about image generators replacing interesting encounters with art. No. I think it's a different story if we're talking about, I don't know, editorial illustration. And this is not my own opinion, but I've seen read articles about this, that illustrators are very concerned about their line of work. And yeah, that is, I think, a different story.
Thank you. And I'll let you move on, but I just wanted to comment that you brought up the physicality of certain forms of art that the digital does not compare to at all. And I think that's a really interesting distinction.
Just a little comment. So my former PhD advisor has a painting robot. So, and I think we all read about the XI acquisition this morning. So that OpenAI is buying a robot company. So there is a bridge being built already. But sorry, I was taking the question away from you, Simon.
Oh, I think Juan is ahead of me. I should give the floor to Juan.
Oh, thank you. So I'm as an industrial designer, I'm very interested in your talk and the references to early or the 20th century designs that are like the seed of the creative process. My question is about the creative process in terms of, like, it seems that the pre-interpretation of the output that the system is providing you to, like, elaborate your final designs, it's happening even before the moment you fit the system. You're curating this selection of images that are coming from those, just say, like, bias, white, and European-centric designs. But at the end, you wanted to design a chair. So you provide chairs to get new ideas for new chairs. To what extent do you think, like, you should, like, instead of using chairs, use buildings or flowers or images of bacteria or whatever? So in what sense do you think, like, that interpretative process is happening even before the beginning of getting results, and how that would affect the final output in your case?
Yeah. One thing I didn't mention is it was a conscious choice that I handed off the generated designs, the generated images, to someone else, because I felt like I knew too much about what went in, and there was only 600 pictures so I had looked at every single one, and yeah, I knew too well what the things were in reference to it. So I wanted to give it to another person who had no idea, to stop that interpretation chain, maybe, if you want to call it at that point. To your other question about using flowers, I think I was thinking about that the other week when I put this presentation together, that I'm not actually so sure how this works today right now, but my understanding is that in these large models, you do more of a transfer learning, or like repriming them on a new data set. This is maybe how this worked with this chair project at IKEA. I'm not really sure. Might be butchering it. But back then on my little GAN, had I thrown in anything else, it would have, it was a very frail system, and putting other stuff might have been dangerous in just getting out noise. But today's models, one opportunity, because they're so sophisticated, is I think that works much better. And yeah, that is something that would be interesting to try with a better technology.
Cool. I got the signal in the back channels that we have to wrap up the session. So that's what we're going to do right now. I want to thank you, Philipp, again, for this very nice, thought-provoking talk. I think it was pretty cool. A lot of the participants liked it. We had very nice questions. And with this, I'm handing it over to Lydia for the first paper session.
thanks. First question for, okay, so no break right now. We're just gonna go for it.
That's
All
right. No break, just go.
Let's do it. So I'm gonna let the first presenters go into present mode and that kind of stuff. So this will be Stable Walk, an interactive environment for exploring Stable Diffusion outputs with Matthias Rost and Sebastian Andresen. Who is going to be presenting? I guess we'll find out soon. Okay,
Yeah,
and just we have
me.
4 papers in this session. You will have 7 minutes for the presentation. I'll get increasingly ruder about cutting you off the longer you eat into that. And then we have 7 minutes for discussion and general reflection. Please throw stuff in the chat so I can bring things up afterwards, and take it away to paper 1.
Thank you. And yeah, please be as obnoxious as you want if I do take more time than I should. I shouldn't do that. And I'm going to try and be extremely quick before I get to showing some stuff. So yeah, thank you. My name is Matthias Rost. And together with Sebastian Andreasson, we are from the University of Gothenburg, working on human-computer interaction stuff. Right. And so today, I'm very happy to present this work that we'll be doing called Stable Walk, which is an interactive environment for exploring Stable Diffusion outputs. So just a very short kind of intro to this. As you all know, we have all these new models that can generate stuff. And as a difference to perhaps GANs, as before, we have these kind of models that are trained on a large set of pictures, and then we can just generate or sample from these models using a text description, a text prompt, right? Just like we saw in the chat. You did that, Lydia, right? Live as we saw the keynote. And so that's kind of interesting. But of course, that's not the only kind of input to these models, although it might look like it sometimes. There's more to it. Here is an interface from Web UI for Stable Diffusion, which just showed it here just to illustrate that it's more than the text prompt, right? There's a bunch of other knobs and texts and stuff like that. And so the question we kind of asked was, so how can you actually get a sense of, how you can control the outputs? How does it affect it? Perhaps from a kind of artistic standpoint, if we look at, take the keynote as inspiration here, but just kind of how do you learn? How do you get a sense of how different inputs affect the outputs, right? And so this is kind of what Stable Diffusion looks like in code. I'm not going to talk about that in detail. You can look in the paper, or we can talk about it later. But some of the things I want to highlight here is there is the prompt as one input, right? And that prompt is gone from a text encoder. It gives us an embedding, which is a vector in a vector space, where similar prompts are close to each other and dissimilar prompts are far away from each other. The whole thing starts with some random noise, and then for a number of time steps and the number of times that you can control yourself, it goes through a little process here where it takes away noise from a noisy image, and in the end, there is barely any noise left. One thing, though, is that this noise is kind of calculated using a little formula here, where this value, CFG, or classifier-free guidance, is instrumental. So these are the kind of things we wanted to look at. How can you explore changing these into controlling the output of Stable Diffusion? So we have the embedding, we have number of steps, and we have this magical number CFG, classifier-free guidance. So now I want to show this little, because this is a demo paper, so we have a demo. So the question is, how does the number of steps, we can take that as just a number, and the CFG value affect outputs of Stable Diffusion? So this is a grid of not yet generated images. We have a prompt, and here I'm going to remove Mantis, but the prompt is we're going to have pictures of a man with a hat riding a bike. And on this grid, we have the number of steps is on the vertical axis. You can see the number of steps at the second number, 4, 20, 36, 52, 68, 44, and down to 100. And on the horizontal axis then is the CFG value, which here is 4 or 6.67 or 9.93, and so on up to 20. And so if we want to just sample here with steps 20 and 12 as CFG, you can click on this and hopefully we'll get an image in a very short while. And here we have a man Ooh, with a top hat. That's the first time I see that. So basically here we have an image of a man, obviously riding a bike. But if we want to then just try and how does number of steps affect this image? Let's just try 36 steps. Instead, it takes a little longer, hopefully almost twice as long. So now his hat is a little bigger. It's interesting. Maybe that's the only thing that steps does. But we can also try the CFG, right? So we go left here, and now we have a lower CFG value. Now his hat is a helmet instead. We can go even more to the left. Things happen to the image, right? So what this tool kind of allows us to do is to kind of quickly, for any prompt, get a sense of how these changes in values affects the outputs. And I'm quite surprised here that it changes what type of hat he gets. But that's one way. So this is one of the kind of views that we have for this. But then we also wanted to understand this prompt space or embedding space, really. So so here we have a different kind of view, which is a canvas view, and we can create an apple, perhaps. No, actually not. A banana. So this is a banana, and then we can also have a kiwi. And what we can do is we can place these on this canvas. Let me do this. Hopefully it's not too small for you guys. And what we wanted to look at is like, how can you combine these two images? Can you create a linear combination of these images? And what we want to do is doing that in embedding space. So we take the two embedding vectors of a banana and a kiwi, and then we send that embedding into the algorithm. And then we basically have a combination of a banana and a kiwi, but in embedding space. So essentially what this allows us to do is to explore the embedding space. So what are different points in this embedding space as kind of interpreted by Stable Diffusion? Or how would Stable Diffusion kind of render these images, right? And we can do more complicated things than this. And we can also take like different animals. So let's take a dog, a hedgehog, and an owl. Oops. Owl, dog, and hedgehog, because these are obviously cute animals. And we can then combine them, right? So let's create a combination of these animals and see what it looks like. And we can also, so this is obviously an owl, dog, hedgehog, as you can all see. And again, this is a sort of a way to kind of see what does this embedding space look like. And what often happens is that you find this, and I'm not going to be able to reproduce that now, but often you find these sort of breakpoints in this embedding space where kind of you have dog, you have dog, you have dog, you have dog, all of a sudden it goes to hedgehog, and then you can start zooming into that space and seeing, okay, where is that actual transition point happening, and what are the different sort of animals or creatures that you can create. How's my time, Lydia? Because I didn't time myself now.
You are at time. You can have 30 seconds to wrap up.
Thank you. So yeah, so that's kind of our ongoing work here, is kind of trying to create a tool that lets users, whoever they may be, kind of more intuitively create a sense or get a sense of how you can gain more, I guess, artistic control of Stable Diffusion in this case. And so these two ways, the grid and the canvas, is just two kind of ways that we've explored with. And we're also looking at how you could do this in other means than just a kind of 2D screen, but also in virtual reality or something like that, to kind of walk around and explore and see, does that give you another sense of it? But I'm happy to go into discussions around this and create other images, perhaps.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Golf clap. I have a question, but anyone else, you can type, you can put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. That last, so I do want to generate more of these because this is addictive. But I will first ask the last thing you just said of that helping person gain control. Every time I use one of these systems, I don't feel super in control. I feel like I understand the model more. It's like, rather than, yeah, it's, I feel like it's, you know, I have a kid, she's 2, and I'm like, I'm trying to understand her all the time. I feel very similar about these AI. I often say to myself, what was the AI thinking when I said hedgehog? Why did it give us this? So I'm just curious if you've thought about that dichotomy of, you know, the user having control or the user not having really any control, just really needing to understand the model in order to get something useful out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, the notion of control is probably an illusion, right? In terms of these things. It's probably more, I mean, if we do feel like we have control, I think it's, as you say, perhaps better way to put it, actually, to say that, no, I feel I have a better understanding of the model. That's probably like as close to control you might have. But then do you really have understanding of the model? I mean, I have an autistic son who's I mean, in relation to your 2-year-old, not saying that she's autistic, but also struggling with speech and having speech deficiencies. So, and what we learn from all the experts is like you have to kind of create communication. You kind of have, when I speak to my son, you have to kind of help him by making everything being communication, right? So trying to understand what he's trying to talk about, but also giving him hints like, now you said this, that was actually communication, right? And I think there's a relationship to these models as well. Like when you start using them, I mean, do you control them, or is it that you're just more in control of your own interpretations of whatever output it is? And then as you see that, okay, maybe I actually wanted to have more of an owl-like thing. Well, to get that, I actually had to go for a hedgehog, like in this case, right? Because that created more of an owl-like dog, even though, you know, it should be more of a hedgehoggy one. Well, that happened to be the case that a little bit of hedgehog made more owly dog, you know? And you could only learn that by kind of exploring it through something like this.
Oh, that is fantastic, and that really ties into like the illusion of control. Now ties it into the ideas we had earlier about, you know, really there's a lot on the interpreter to say what it means.
Absolutely.
I would like to try another one. I feel like, you know, this is I want to beat up on your system, basically. Let's find two things that are super unrelated, like maybe an owl and a skyscraper, or, you know, even within the animal class, like, you know, they all have amoebas that are, you know, some core. Yeah. So what's in between there?
Something nature, but also there's the city in it, I guess.
Oh, wow. That was very deep for me. I thought it was gonna like put shitty owl eyes on a building. I really thought it was gonna do something bad.
So yeah. So I mean, I worked a lot with this, and sometimes you get it's very different, like what aspect it is that you're getting from the model. In this case, I think it's kind of the interpretation here from us being humans is like, okay, there's a little bit of nature, there's a little bit of city, right? Like human and nature. But I think a lot of this is because of what this image looks like. So here we have like tall things, tall objects, right? And here we have some sort of a rounder things, that's still nature. And I think that these kind of trees here come from the layout of this image. So sometimes there's a lot of, like the image that comes from Stable Diffusion or this diffusion process comes a lot from what is the initial noise. And sometimes it's much more about the prompts. So it's the random noise that the originals with is sometimes very powerful, and sometimes it's much more the prompt that is guiding the image.
This is really fantastic, or at least what I interpreted this to mean as the connection between owl and skyscrapers is intermediate. I don't know, between the concrete jungle and the forest, it's sort of like the suburbs. There's some environmental in between.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, someone asked, are you using a fixed noise input for generating all the images? I think they have the same seed, right?
We have the same seed. So for these images, it's going to be the same. So if we change that, it will update all the images with a different seed.
Could we try a different seed for these two things? I noticed, I don't use Stable Diffusion that much, but if you use the same seed, you get a nice consistency. So like all your animals were like facing forward. And so that made for a better blend than if one was, you know, an action shot. Okay, well, so totally different.
Let's just say, since this is a demo with a time constraint, that 12 was not an accident.
Ah, I got it.
So, yeah.
Okay, so what do
I
we
have a
have?
question, Lydia. I have a hand up.
Oh, okay.
So you can see the can you see? Nope.
Yes.
Okay.
Just thank you for that. That is a very interesting concrete background on the owl. But Mary Lou, please.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Lydia's question about control, and I actually saw this very differently in terms of control. I thought it gives us a lot more control than just a single prompt or maybe an iteration on a prompt, because it gives us a control over spatial representation of this in combination or emergence that we see that Stable Diffusion does for us. And I thought the interpretation that you gave was really interesting, and then the interpretation that Lydia gave. So I just wanted to follow back to a lot of the chat that was going on during the keynote, that we're sort of in control. I mean, we are giving the prompts, we are moving around this space, and we are interpreting. I mean, what else could there be for control? If we are prompting, we are moving around the space, and we are interpreting. The AI isn't controlling our interpretation.
Fantastic. Okay, we are at time. So thank you very much. That was a really fun demo. And I want to invite our next speaker, who I don't see in the chat, but I hope you're here, Shuoyang Zhang, StyleGAN-Canvas. Oh, there we go. Jasper, sorry about that. And you've got 7 minutes. Take it away when you're ready.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is Shuoyang Zheng. You can also call me Jasper. Hopefully my screen share is working properly. And I will be presenting our work called StyleGAN-Canvas, Augmenting StyleGAN-3 for real-time human AI co-creation. Well, generative adversarial network have been rapidly developed over the recent year, and notably the StyleGAN, a style-based latent variable model, has demonstrated its capability to create digital artifact with high diversity and high visual fidelity. And especially in its third generation, the StyleGAN-3, they also called alias-free generative adversarial network. The introduction of continuous convolution has enabled the generative network to perform equally well regardless pixel coordinate, and further paving the way for more flexible human-AI interaction. StyleGAN model have been found to be widely used for creativity supporting tool, creating novel human-AI co-creative experience. And at the meantime, analytical framework have been proposed to analyze the human-AI co-creative process. For example, the mixed initiative generative AI interface, which is a framework with 11 actions to frame co-creative interaction into sequence of action. Our research focused on the action ideate, which refer to the use of high-level concept to guide or shape the generation of an artifact. However, when it comes to a latent variable model, like StyleGAN, previous work have highlighted their lack of ability to interpret visual concepts, such as translating sketches or visual layouts to a fully realized artifact. So in order to bring StyleGAN's capability into the discussion of co-creative design patterns, we carry out our research question. That is, how can we augment StyleGAN-3 with the ability to use high-level visual concept to guide the generation, and therefore it will fulfill the action ideate. And by doing so, we hope to align StyleGAN with the co-creative patterns in the MIGI framework. So to address this idea, we adapt the existing StyleGAN architecture. The original latent variable model takes a latent code as the input, and it has a mapping network, a generator network. The generation is fully controlled by the latent code. And in our approach, we propose an appendant encoder, feature encoder, aims to extract extract feature from the input image to kind of condition the generation process. Well, the detailed implementation is described in the third section of our paper, and I'm gonna skip some of the detail here because we'll kind of run out of time. The training process is also slightly modified. First, we pre-process the ground truth image into condition, and then the ground truth image and the condition are provided as paired data for training. And during inference, we use the same pre-processed pipeline to process the input into condition and then use the trained model for generation. We test our model for the following task. First is generating face image from blurry image, generating landscape image from blurry image, and also generate face image from edges. We built a graphic interface to facilitate the real-time interaction between the user and the model. The interface allows the input from the web camera. And in addition to the baseline model, this generation system is also implemented with a technique called network bending, which is an approach to alter a trained model's internal feature map by inserting transformation filter between different convolution layers. The detailed interface design is described in the fourth section of our paper. We also carry out a human subject study to evaluate our model in a generic creative context. And in the study, the participants were asked to use the graphic interface and then arrange and lay out paper cut in front of a web camera, pointing to a paper canvas. And then they were asked to use the system for unlimited time and until it reached something that they thought is interesting. And in the follow-up interview, we asked the participant about their attitude regarding this form of interaction, their creation process, and their generation outcomes. And we also asked the differences in their perception of using different models, the face model and the landscape model. And after the interview, we analyzed the kind of aggregate the data we have collected, and following factor that influence the interaction was identified. So first is the aim of the interaction. Well, most participants point out that they would use this form of creation as inspiration, just to give them realized development based on their ideate concept. And however, if the aim is to create a more serious piece of work, they will eventually switch to more stable model, a stable method, and with more lower control to kind of refine the work, because they do want to have to be more manually control over the generation process, like in control of the details like lighting and textures. The second factor is the exploration process. We observed that most participants primarily focus on exploring the outcome from the model by first randomly arranging the paper cut, and when they reach a layout that may trigger interesting result, they then iteratively adjust the arrangement of the paper cut and until they reach a satisfactory result.
Sorry, we're at time, so if you could just take 30 seconds to wrap it up. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I'm reaching the conclusion. So by aligning the StyleGAN model with the action in the mixed initiative generative AI interface, we hope to bring StyleGAN's capability into the discussion of co-creative design process. And while further study on the model architecture will improve the generation quality, the current result in our research show that bridging StyleGAN to the co-creative context will reveal more unexplored interaction possibility enabled by AI. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much. There's definitely one burning question, observation. Michael Muller says, I love the use of paper cutouts as a different kind of physicalized sketch. So it's interesting because it's physical. I mean, it feels like drawing could have been maybe similar, but you didn't go that route. And my question is, why? Why the cutouts?
Yeah, you're right. Using this same kind of more physical form of interaction will make the creator to have more physical feeling towards the system. And the reason we use paper cut is that would be a more intuitive way. Like you have this shape, you cut it into something that you like, and then you can just put it together, and then maybe later when you're creating something else, you bring them back, put the paper cut back into the camera, and then see what is something new, new generation coming. So it's more easy to reuse some pattern they have already created.
I love that. That's certainly creative and makes it much more interesting. I wonder if there was, oh, Michael, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, thank you. What a wonderful talk. I'm thinking we could do drawings, or we could use paper cutouts. Those lead to different expressive capabilities. I'm sorry, that was a fancy way of saying I can't draw the same face that I can make with paper cutout, and vice versa. And so I'm interested in the choice of that particular medium versus drawing versus in the States, it's called Mr. or Ms. Potato Head, where you stick plastic noses and eyes onto a potato. That's another way to make a face. You chose this one, and I love it. And why did you choose this one?
Actually, it's very interesting to like interpret a face in your how you interpret a face in your idea. It could be just a round paper cut with a bunch of drawings on that, or it could be a potato head. But that is, yeah, that's really interesting because I really haven't think about that. But it's yeah. I don't got an answer for this question, but thank you so much. If that is really interesting.
Thank you for making us think. It's great.
Yeah. In the spirit of pushing a system to its limit, go ahead and throw a potato in there. I'd be curious to see what happens. Maybe, in a couple days or so. Matthias says, I think a big difference between drawings and moving cutouts is that you can update, change, modify something made out of a physical cutout more easily. I like that. I also like the idea of just like picking up scissors. It's a very, I don't want to say violent, but it's a much more physical act, I think, with much more commitment than doodling on a paper. At least it's something I don't do every day. So these are great thoughts. We are at time, so thank you very much, and yay! And I'd like to invite the next presenters to start projecting. Juan Salamanca, I believe you are next up. Make sure screen share works. Fantastic. And whenever you are ready, your 7 minutes will begin.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Can hear you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Juan Salamanca. I'm faculty of the School of Art and Design at the University of Illinois. This is a collaboration with Daniel Gomez from the Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona and Sergi Jorda. And this comes from our experience, like in the design studio, in my case, like in the graphic design studio, and also in the case of Daniel, his experience in like music creation. So if this is, so we want to start with this diagram, and we are interested in like how computational creativity is being defined. And then on the right, we see a traditional way of defining computational creativity. And we think that in that realm, the concern is about how the system produces something that is something like worthy enough to be regarded as creative. But in the domain of computational co-creativity on the left, we think we are like facing a different concern about how to think of what is creativity in this domain. And we have this like loop here in which there's a prompt from the human, and there's a system that is like constantly exploring the conceptual space of whatever it's trying to figure out. And then it's a human estimator who is assessing the chances of achieving something that is like the next generation of valuable proto-artifacts. And in this case, the notion of proto-artifact is something that we find like is essential in the description of this process. So we want to say that in terms of the difference between the traditional CC, computational creativity, and CCC, which is computational co-creativity, it's like this concern about like this sub-processes of generation and creativity that is happening there. And that we define them as like processes of divergent and convergent generation. And we think that while AI generative models are highly efficient in the divergent phase of the process, they pose a burden for humans in the convergent phase, which is like synthesis and definition. And we have seen in some talks today about the people talking about like the idea of like transformation and interpretation into being that is being made by humans. So that is a work that is being done, and it's required in the process. And artifacts generated with sophisticated generative models everything is a proto-artifact until the human selects, reviews, or validates or approves that product. And only at that time, it becomes like the final artifact. And uses of generative system often fall in this like slot machine effect. And I think that the more experience you have with the system, the less you get into that. But early users are like very tempted to overgenerate intermediate proto-artifacts. And in the music domain, this is cumbersome because the workload of evaluating proto-artifacts grows exponentially with the length of the musical pieces. And one alternative is outsourcing the evaluation to humans that are producers that may have a good sense of like what is the potential creativity of those pieces. But even among humans, there's a lack of consistency in the criteria and how to assess those proto-artifacts. So we think that is a definition of creativity that we want to bring is like this idea of dynamic creativity, like the creativity that requires potential, originality, and effectiveness. And we want to make emphasis in this idea of potential because it's about in the intermediate process of generating proto-artifacts, those proto-artifacts should show some originality and effectiveness. And we want to like explore that concept in this idea. So we found that there's a general definition, like a conventional definition in computational creativity. It's like Boden's definition, which has 3 dimensions: novelty, surprise, and value. Those are dimensions that define what is something deemed creative. But Corazza proposes a definition that is based on 2 dimensions: originality and effectiveness. And we see that there's like some compatibility between those definitions, and it's something that is claimed by the authors of those definitions, between novel Bodens and Corazza. So with this idea of like having the definition of like creativity, we wanted to explore these two questions. What creativity dimensions should be used to assess co-creative processes, and what information can be derived from each creativity dimension about the quality of proto-artifacts? So we developed a system that is a generative music system. And here on the right, we explain the system. Basically, the human provides some MIDI files, some tempo to the system, and it manipulates some transformations. And the system generates some music, and then at the end produces. The human does some assessment and manipulates again some transformations on the system. We've had here a demo of how it works the system. So that is a real-time generation of the sound. So we did an experiment. We produced a sample of stimuli. We provided. We did a test of like recruited some participants to ask them how surprising, how valuable, and how novel did they find all the samples produced in this intermediate process of generating these proto-artifacts. And the results are this. We found that the dimension of novelty or surprise, when it's appeared non-discernible. So the idea of like finding novelty and surprise in these intermediate products, it's not easily to identify in the answers, or apparently the subjects are like using them interchangeable. The notion of value stands out as a significant attribute of creativity, but it's even stronger when the training of the subjects grows higher. So some participants have low training and they were not able to identify the value. They like have the same ideas, the same perception of value and surprise and novelty, but experts have a clearly different.
Time, so if you could just wrap up in the next 30 seconds.
Good. So the conclusions are like we find exploring novelty. The idea of potential is something that we want to like bring into the discussion of proto-artifacts, and we think that a two-dimensional space to evaluate creativity based on value and originality could simplify the task for low training estimators in the assessment of proto-artifacts. And we found that we need a clear set of definitions to really work on this in the community, because there are many nuances on this. What is novelty? What is surprise? What is originality? What is effectiveness? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We have time for maybe one question or comment. I will then add mine, which is, you defined part of the role of the human as assessing the chances of achieving a good next generation. I had not heard anyone say that. How I interpreted that was, when I use like Stable Diffusion or whatever, I have to think, if I press generate again, will it get me anything better? I have to be estimating the system to think, is it worth my time to make this better? Because often it isn't. The machine has a limit and it just can't read my mind, and that's it. So I thought, I hadn't heard that. Or is that what you meant? Or am I doing my own thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's that idea that when I run the system again and I have something that was built before, I have this expectation that I'm going to get something that is getting me closer to something that satisfies my expectation of getting something interesting or something novel or something that is surprising.
It's a little bit to what happened when you asked the previous presenter to change the seed, right? Like, oh, if I change the seed, will I get something better? Will it bring me something more, whatever you're thinking about, right? So it's this desire to, as it doesn't cost that much to generate stuff, you feel like maybe there's no end, and you can get better and better and improve at whatever you're wanting to improve, right? In the generation.
Fantastic. This model has been just really amazing to me. So thanks for those insights. We are at time, so I am going to invite our last speaker of the session to share screen. Ubukun Olatunji. You'll have to correct my pronunciation, but
no, your pronunciation is fine. That's okay.
So glad I tried. You only learn if you train your classifier.
Exactly that. You definitely tried. So given that this is the one before the break, I know what that's always like. So I'll make sure that I'm on point and time myself for everybody's benefit. So firstly, thanks for inviting me, of course. And in a nutshell, right, I'll start the timer. Why create or try to create and build a poetry co-creation system to make people feel they have creative superpowers? A few points to note. This is a work in progress. There are no results yet because it's something I need to build. The purpose really is to look at alternatives to current writing support tools and large language models, which a number of the speakers have touched upon. And this is important, that poetry includes song lyrics. And I'll come on to explain later on why song lyrics are relevant for this. So starting with, because it's poetry, of course, a quote by, so apologies for the, the kind of the gendered language of Robert Graves, but essentially what we have here, I think, is an interesting way of thinking about a map almost for generative AI. So a poet of experience talks about, the human experience, of course. Predecessors, contemporaries is a way of thinking about peers, as well as historically. Judge in terms of judgment and human judgment, and again, we can come on to that. And then this particular phrases here that I've highlighted with recreating technical and emotional dilemmas are ways of thinking about creative constraints to some extent. And from this, I'm a poet myself, so it's the field that I tend to have been more steeped in than the AI, are a bunch of machine-centered questions. And effectively, these can be summarized in terms of, does a system need to be able to write poetry well in order to support a human writing poetry well? Does a general system, i.e. the large language models, are they more effective than poetry-specific ones in terms of the writing process? And then the final two, how much is the highly personalized user terms, can we use them to influence large language models? And then the final one, which is then leading on to the human-centered one, is really, how can we assess what writing better poetry means, right? Which is obviously going to be critical if that's our task. And again, this is a short list of then leading on to the human-centered kind of questions, which are around general versus poetry-specific language models and how we might be able to test them and humans testing them. How much poem recommendations might help readers, also help writers. And again, I'll explain later on why that's significant. And can we get some sense of what an individual user's poetic style really is that we can measure, describe, and operationalize? The reason this is significant is because ultimately as a poet, what you're trying to do is develop your own poetic voice, not anybody else's, just your own. That's, the purpose of an artist ultimately. And from these, what I and colleagues have been looking at is what we're calling a kind of sparse and dense network model. I won't go into lots of detail about it, but effectively, it's a way of trying to blend the power that you can get from large language models. So as Philipp said, the GTP5s or whatever else comes after it, which are black box. Models that you can actually customize somewhat more. So we might think of that as, I don't know, something like a GPT-2 that's open source that you can actually potentially adapt. Then a poetry specific one, which could be created from scratch. And alongside that on the far right, a poetry and lyric database. That part's going to be important in terms of both training data, but also seeing whether just having a very, very targeted specific database of all the poetry, all the lyrics you can get, leads you potentially to different kinds of outcomes effectively, and combining these models to run a number of experiments. And just to focus on a couple of things, the broad level idea is that you start with the user actually uploading or personalizing the system themselves. And they would do that through one of two ways. Either if you've written a number of poems and you have some of your own text, you put that text in, right? A prompt, but we can think of it as maybe a bit more advanced than the prompts you get at the moment. Or you actually just state a whole bunch of artists and work that you like, which is another way of kind of telling the system, okay, if I was writing, I like Robert Graves type poems, or, whoever else it may be, Christina Rossetti, whatever. Then a database of poems, obviously, to support that, which would need to have some sense of both clean text, but more importantly, rhyme scheme, parts of speech, a whole bunch of other data, very specific just for poetry, not trained on a corpus of, news articles and Reddit threads, et cetera, et cetera. And then what the system would look to return is partially completed poetic text. And the only reason that's in brackets is because actually the goal of the system is to augment what people do, as opposed to just be really good at you pressing some buttons and it turns out really good poems. And then critically, the final part is that recommendations. And what that means there is that literally, as you are writing a poem, poems that your poem could be like, or that you might want to consider in your craft and in your writing. And again, the reason for that is that the goals is that, and I just focus on the final one, to be honest, which is that, or the final two rather, that by targeted recommendations, the idea there is that good writers tend to be good readers. And the idea is it's very hard to write something well if you really haven't read that much. So if you were creating an artistic work, to know things that your thing is like could be really useful for you in terms of considering it and considering how you're doing things. And then ultimately what the system would need to do is allow the user to switch between writing, editing generated text, and then this idea of browsing recommendations. And then just very briefly, the last couple as I wrap up on the 5-minute mark is that in terms of the future work or the work that I need to do, obviously the top one, actually build the thing, right, would be kind of useful. And the idea is to do that this year in some level, testing with an initial cohort. And then the final part, you recall that maybe I said earlier about why music is important, or lyrics, is to leverage the popularity of what, is arguably the most popular form of contemporary poetry, which is hip hop. To put it into numbers and give an idea, hip hop accounts for about 26% of all music streams. It's 1.85 billion people worldwide listen to it regularly, according to the IFPI. That's a lot of people. So actually, this stuff is, we could say, well, okay, why poetry is not really that important. Actually, it's really significant. It affects a lot of people across the world, every day, and that we could leverage that. And finally, by using hip hop, what you could also do is it's a really interesting way to look at bias. Both bias in terms of language, but also participation in our kind of communities from groups that are just not involved at the moment. And then I'll end with a couple of quotes, one from Chuck D, because I started with Robert Graves, so it's good to have a hip hop artist here, which is that, poetry is central to hip hop. That's why we can use it. And I think in the community, we miss that a bit at the moment. I think there's a real space there to do something interesting. And then to go back to the final question, why a system? Because more poetry is needed. Aside from just being a wonderful art form, it really is something that is underutilized, as I said, especially with the hip hop angle in the research community, I think, and there's a lot more that we could do with it. And that's it. Thank you. And hopefully I'm on.
You are on time. That is amazing. Look, you can hear my beeper go.
Oh, good.
Sorry, got a little carried away there. Absolutely fascinating. I have to ask, why are you yourself a poet? What is the I totally agree, more poetry is necessary.
Yeah, it's the field I've spent most time in. Oh, sorry. So yeah, it's the field I've spent most time in. So yes, poet, but I mean, I'm a researcher at Swansea University, computational foundry, so a computer scientist, but I started much more in poetry. So poetry is always something I've written all the time, and art, and just an obsession with language leads you into linguistics and then computational linguistics. So, and I think we're this interesting, I mean, this is, Philipp's talking in a sense. When I listened to it, I thought, he's covered some stuff that I'm probably going to cover less effectively. But what's fascinating is that this art plus technology at the moment, this crossover is it's like being on day one of something that, is hugely important in the world, and you get fortunate enough to be in that community. So for me, to answer your question in a long-winded way, I need to bring my poetic side to it as well, because that's part of what I can hopefully add as an individual to my research, as opposed to just a pure play computer scientist, right? Because I've not spent 15 and 20 years in that, but I can bring the writing craft to what I'm doing. So hopefully that answers your question.
Perfect. Yes, I love when people bring their secret skill into computer science. Mary Lou?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. I love the idea of giving a special attention to people who might not otherwise have a voice in poetry. But that comes along with some concerns that other researchers have found, that when you have people interact with an AI, their attitude towards the AI might affect their response or willingness to continue to interact. Where, you know, when you start to bring in groups that might be considered marginalized, they might feel that the AI is pushing them towards a voice that isn't theirs. As we know, there's a lot of bias in the training that these models have developed from. And so how do you want to address that concern, that the variability in attitudes towards the AI might have a larger impact on your study results than the AI itself?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. I suppose I'm at the early stages, so I don't have all the answers for sure, but I think that part of the solution maybe lies around, I think there's an element of co-creation to some extent and actually deeply involving the users. I think there's another element of, so if I think of my own background, I think that with some explanation and guidance, I think there's a lot of people out there that get terrified about, they read articles about GPT-3, GPT-4, a whole bunch of stuff and get terrified and even think they couldn't understand it. And I think with some work, you can give, you know, potential participants enough sense of what the model can do and where the issues might be. And I suppose you then have to just do the hard work of iterating it and check yourself, you know, if people are getting outcomes that isn't representing their voice, what does that mean and why, and go back to the drawing board. So I suppose some of the answer is accepting that you don't have all the answers and being open to that. And then I suppose the final thing is communities like this and getting critical voices so that you are asking the right questions and going about things in the right way. Because for me, it really is important to get the underrepresented voices in there. But in order to do it, as you say, there are challenges for sure. I'm a computer scientist. Everybody on here understands what a large language model is. It's a bit easier. Clearly, that's not always the groups I'm going to be working with. So I don't have an exact answer, but I think openness at least feels like the start of something.
Well said. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. I had never actually considered using poetry-specific generation models, but there were a couple of different things that you're proposing to make this easier. I want to focus on the recommendation parts, because I don't know how it works for poetry, but if I were to do any other type of art, if I were to see some type of art that is very similar to what I want to do, it would be really hard to then step away from that and do my own thing again, which is what you do want to do in the end. So how do you think this will behave, or is this the right approach to take here?
It's a good question. I think that I'd answer it in two parts, I think. And what I probably didn't touch on is that there's always the distinction, of course, between the artists or the users who are more experienced and the ones who are less experienced, right, in terms of scaffold and a whole bunch of other stuff. I think when you're generally quite good at your art form, so let's say you've spent 10 plus years writing, you're going to be pretty aware that the things you're creating are going to be like something else. And so the kind of the recall that you might have from discovering a thing is similar doesn't have quite the same impact, because A, you're aware that that's potential, and B, you can hopefully focus on the nuance of why my thing is different, because you're unlikely to be able to write a song that says something completely new that nobody else has ever said. It's really hard. So then the real question is, what am I saying that's unique in a different way, even if it is similar to X or Y? So I don't think that's necessarily such a problem depending on the kind of users. It tends to be more of a problem for people at the early stages, because often they will imagine their thing is completely unique and then be slightly distraught when you point out, if you're really experienced, oh, but you realize there's 20 other people who've said that in the same way, not to scare them. So hopefully, but another way of looking at it, maybe based on what you said, is if we thought of it in, I think with Hendrik's earlier, with a spectrum, you could then give someone something that is really very, very different from theirs, right? So the themes may be the same or a bunch of other things, but a system picks up, okay, these things are different enough so it doesn't kind of give you that challenge. So yeah, I think it's a good question, but I think there are potentially a few ways around it.
We have 1 minute left. Michael, would you like to close us out?
I'll try to be quick. I was thinking about Mary Lou's question, and I was thinking we have some ideas of how to adjust the degree of initiative in a human-computer conversation. Schneider has a two-dimensional model. There's a whole slew of one-dimensional models that are trade-offs. But I'm thinking maybe people at different stages of the development of their poetic voice might want less or more interference, it might be, or contribution or creativity by the, I'm already taking most of the minute, so I'm going to be quiet. Please say whatever you want to say.
Well, I was going to say actually that, no, I completely agree. And it's something that in the paper we look at more, because I think you're absolutely right that you've got everything from the very beginning where you'd need a lot of scaffolding maybe. So if I go into schools a lot and work with young people and teenagers, and they don't always have a solid sense of rhyme, let's say, right? Half, full rhyme, assonance, consonants, etc. So potentially you can see that there's a lot more scaffold than they require. The better you get, you tend to want the system to probably get away a bit because you can do it. So yeah, I think absolutely. And that, of course, has interface implications as well in a whole bunch of things that, you know, I've got to spend a lot more time on. But yeah.
We're out of time, but I'd love to talk with you more about this.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, we'd love to.
Now is your lucky chance, because we are going to take a 15-minute intermission. Well,
just say a few words. So we're going to take 15 minutes, and I'm going to open up the breakout rooms so that you have a smaller group of people to chat with. But this is a time to stand up, stretch, get a cup of coffee, do a bio break. If you come back before we are back in sessions, then you can just talk to the people in your breakout group. It just gives you a more manageable number of people. And those people who are presenting next, please come back before. So we'll be back in 15 minutes. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We'll get started in about a minute. And Werner will be running the next session, so I'll hand it over to him to get it started. I'll put the link in the chat again if you want to get back to that slide that has the link to the program and the proceedings.
I'll wait another minute, Mary, because I think we said 15 minutes, right? I think it was sort of like 5:32.
So we're close. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I got a really big cup of coffee. Yeah. Great. I love coffee.
All right, I think it's 5:32. Should we get going?
Yes, thanks. Breakout rooms are gone. About 35 people here, so take it away.
So welcome to session number 2 of our workshop. So in this session, we are going to be diving a little bit deeper into research and design issues of generative AI. We have 4 talks in this session, and as in the previous session, we'd like to keep the talks to 7 minutes, plus 7 minutes Q&A. So please stick to your assigned time. I'll be starting the timer here on my side. And the first talk in this session is by Yiren Liu, Mengxiao Yu, Meng Jiang, and Yun Huang. It's titled Creative Research Question Generation for Human-Computer Interaction Research. And Yiren, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I saw you on the call, so it's all yours. There you are.
Thank you so much. And I'll be the one to present our next presentation and emission.
And I'll start the timer. You ready?
Thank you. Yes, I'll start my timer on my side so I know, just to make sure not to exceed it. And yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Yiren Liu, and I'm a second-year PhD student from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And for this research, we have been working with our collaborators from the University of Notre Dame. And the title of the paper is Creative Research Question Generation for HDI Research. And we find this topic particularly interesting. I want to share it with you about what we have done. So first off, there have been a lot of works going on for using AI to augment researchers and the creative process of doing research. And this is the major motivation of the research. Recently, there are many AI tools being used that are designed as assistive technology in augment human productivity and creative process. And particularly using for AI tools for research, there are many use cases and examples past research have explored. This includes literature summarization, basically summarizing the literatures and papers that have been existing in the past that's related to works and also citation recommendation, and also scientific hypothesis generation. This is particularly for mostly work has been done in biomedical researchers generating the hypothesis that researchers can explore before they actually spend resources into doing those explorations. And but for HCI research process, the very distinctive feature or attributes of these kind of research is extremely creative comparing to most traditional research kind of like paradigms, and especially during the beginning phases of the research life cycle. And this example of how I would depict our usual research life cycle as, and developing research question is a major part as the starting point. And we chose to focus on this part and see how we can develop AI tools and the methods to support the human kind of creative process in this kind of phase, and generating new research ideas and questions, that is. And so why do we choose research question? Comparing to traditional research ideas and the proposals and the hypotheses, research question is usually describing the outline of the research, I mean, in HCI research particularly, and it tends to be very open-ended and creative, that basically try to stimulate the thinking, the creative thinking of researchers, and guiding towards the findings and the methods of the paper. And to conceptualize the whole process of proposing a research idea and a question, and ending up with refining it and into a actually outcome, is that the researchers, we conceptualize the process to be searching for existing literature, reading through them, and writing a summarization paragraph or a piece of text to summarize what the past researchers have done. And then based on that, think about what are new research questions that are worth exploring, and also the repetition of this process to refine the research questions that researchers want to explore. And basically, we build a model to support this kind of recreation. For the data, we collected a set of open access papers that comes to approximately 9,000 from archive that are under the area of human-computer interaction, and we parsed and extracted the research questions from these papers, including the related works, the title of the paper, and also other relevant sections based on a regular expression-based matching. And then we manually validated and yielded a high-quality set of around 158 pairs of this data tuples that maps each related work to their corresponding RQs from existing paper. And with that, we use a existing text generation model called BART, and we explore 3 settings in training such a model. First is vanilla kind of fine-tuning, which is basically inputting a related work section of a paper and ask the model to generate the RQs based on that. And the end goal is to replicate the ground truth RQ based on our given data set. In the second case, we basically emphasize that we can do it even without the ground truth data set. We can still do it through a knowledge transfer kind of learning. And in that case, we use the paper titles as the ground truth RQs and try to ask the model to regenerate the titles based on the related work. And the third setting is that we also introduce a setting of based on the knowledge retrieval, which is basically giving a already existing collection of papers. We use DPR, dense process retrieval, to retrieve the most relevant context and ask the model to generate the RQs based on that. And these are 3 technical settings we have explored. But another question that is also important is how to evaluate this generation, that it is open-ended and also creative. And based on also the Bolden's 3 criteria of creativity, we constructed 3 automatic evaluation metrics, including the distant king, difference in bird score. These 2 evaluates the novelty of the generation, and also the surprise of the generation, which is based on the perplexity that is evaluated through another larger language model. I'll not dive into the details because due to the time limit. And the results we found is that we also compared the results comparing to directly generating without training through GPT-3. And we found that GPT-3 increased the generation novelty, but underperforms fine-tuned models in accuracy and the level of surprise. And also we found that the knowledge augmentation, either retrieval or transfer, is effective on giving better HCI-RQ generation. And we also provided a model, a demo of our fine-tuned model in this public accessible website, in case you're interested in trying out. And for the future work, there are several drawbacks in our current research. One, the top one, of course, is that we didn't have time to do any user study, and that is something we want to focus on, and which is also currently undergoing as the follow-up work of this research. And also the second thing is that we want to also improve the generative method to specific account for open-endedness of the generation and also creativity, which we haven't considered at this point. And yeah, and this is the general takeaway of our research. Thank you, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you very much. Perfect timing. Great job.
Thank you.
So let's open it up for questions. So if people have questions, I do have a couple of questions, but if someone else has a question, why don't people go first? If I don't see a hand up, then I will fire off my question first. Actually, one thing I have, could you share the URL for the system with in the chat or so? I think that would be really interesting. Oh, it's already there. Excellent.
Thank you,
Thank you, Lydia. So I have a question that I cannot hold back to ask. So I read your paper, but I didn't see any research questions in your paper that were explicitly spelled out. So I was wondering about that. So that was one question, as maybe a less serious question. But my second question, I'm shooting this out too at the same time, is I was also wondering when I read your paper, how, and maybe with the demo, this is more clear when I go to that URL, but I haven't done this before. I was just thinking, how does the workflow, how do you envision the workflow of a system like this? When would a researcher go and ask for research question creation, and how would a researcher put in the right information so the system is actually able to create research questions? So those were my two questions.
Thank you so much for that. Those are excellent questions. For the first question, the research question of my own paper, yes, I think that is, we didn't clearly spell it out in our paper, but it's basically aiming to see if we can design, or is there a way to propose a design that can actually help researchers in coming up with a creative research question, and also both in terms of novelty and the surprise. But since you mentioned this problem, we also found that when we are collecting our data set, that most papers didn't really, even if in the HCI field, they didn't clearly spell out their RQs explicitly. And in our research, that's a kind of a challenge in terms of collecting this kind of a ground truth mapping. But it also reflects that during research, the creative process is not necessarily bound to coming up with actual creative research questions, but especially in other fields that are more technical, they have research ideas, but they might not be written in the form of a research question. So that's actually a very important follow-up question that I want to investigate. Apart from in the form of research question, can we come up with other kind of a generation form that can help researchers to boost their creativity process? That's one question. And for the second question, I think it's actually a very good question about the system itself, because we are proposing a model only, but we are also currently undergoing studies in terms of how this model can be actually used in when it's put in actual research life cycle. For example, collecting literatures, but what kind of literature is important, and what kind of literatures the researchers and the user want to choose to use as the input to the model. That's actually a very complex question. I think would be also a very valuable question to study in terms of understanding the actual interaction between the user and the creative augmentation system. And that's what we have been working on currently. And we hope that we can soon publish something that to share with you regarding our thoughts and findings on that. And thanks for the questions.
Thank you, Jeroen. So we have actually two more questions. The first one is by Katie, and then Mikal. Katie, you want to go?
Yeah, thanks so much for presenting this work. I also read the paper, and I like quickly tested your app just now with like one of my own papers, which was very fun. And in your paper, it sounds like you're kind of thinking of the generated research questions as being used quite early on in the research process, let's say. But I wonder if you've considered using it later on, like almost as perhaps a paper writing tool, where the system's generated research questions are maybe a reflection of what your related work points to. And in that sense, it might show you like some gaps in things you haven't thought of, or perhaps reflects like how well you wrote your related work section. Like if the system comes up with a research question that's really different than the one you came up with, perhaps your related works isn't pointing the reader in the right way. It's almost a piece of writing feedback. I wonder if you've thought about those like later stage use cases, or you've seen that in your studies.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'm thinking about two things I want to share regarding a question. One is that we have been doing some neat finding after we completed this study at this step preliminarily, and we talked to a bunch of researchers. Some of them are more like novice researchers, some of them senior researchers, and we found that for novice researchers, they figured that this kind of tool can be used to design kind of like a teaching or instructional guiding tool that help them understand how they write the papers and how they introduce RQs and these kind of things. They see this potential, and we found that as a actually existing part of need. So I think what you said regarding as a self-reflection tool being used when they're writing their related work section or survey sections, I think that would be a very interesting thing and also valuable thing if we introduce that part of the tool. And also on the other hand, that when researchers are writing a paper or coming up with a potential research idea, they might want to see papers that are not only under one single theme, what they initially thought of, but also from other themes, even other domains. If we're talking about HCI research, and that's something we also want to look into, that is this kind of additional knowledge that the researchers probably isn't initially an expert in, would contribute to the creation of research questions that have knowledge from other domains. Would that be helpful as a creative tool in that sense? And yeah, thanks for the question.
Okay, so we need to move on. Last question, Mikhail. We can make it quick. That would be great.
Yes, sure. So thanks for the interesting talk. I wonder about your matrices that you choose. If I recall, those are surprising and creativity. And I wonder because when, for example, I read papers or review them, I'm looking on novelty, on importance, which are not exactly the same. And I wonder why you decide to choose these creativity and surprising, which they're not obvious for me, that those are the qualities that you want for your research questions.
Yeah, because when we are thanks for the question first. And then when we are designing these three metrics, we refer to the theoretical framework that was proposed by Bowden, and it's widely used as we find that it's widely used in computational creativity later as a kind of evaluation framework, because this framework aims to evaluate both novelty and surprise as the element when it comes to creativity. And in novelty, there is I think in the first section of this workshop, Dr. Salamanca also mentioned that they use this framework and as compared to other creative frameworks. I have to say that we chose this framework more like arbitrarily because we think it fits our own research as a research team, our research values, when come up with our own way to, in terms of coming up with these questions. But maybe there are rooms to do studies in terms of using different frameworks as to also come up with automatic evaluation to see if it really correlates with human perception. And at this point, we haven't conducted any human studies to validate this framework as what we have come up with. Does it work or not? But that's important next step for us.
Okay, thank you. If you guys want to continue the conversation in the chat, please feel free, but we have to move to the next one. So I'd like to invite our next speaker. It's, I think, Steve Ross. The paper is by Steve, Michael, Fernando, and Stephanie and Justin. Steve, are you speaking? Who's speaking?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'm setting my timer, Steve, whenever you're ready.
Ready? All right.
Ready to go.
Ready to start. Okay. Hi, I'm Steve Ross. I'm a senior technical staff member at IBM. This work is a result of a project taken on by our team in IBM Research concerning human AI co-creation with generative models. A long time ago, Chuck Rich and Dick Waters presented a vision of an artificial pair programmer. We wanted to see if the technology had reached the point where we could attempt to realize that vision. We built a programmer's assistant prototype, which marries a program editor to a chat interface. The language model we used is the same one that powered GitHub Copilot, a plugin that provides command completion services in an IDE. We have a paper in the conference describing this prototype and the user study we performed, but today I'm going to talk about the process of getting the model to behave as a proper conversational assistant. First, let's quickly review what a large language model does. An autoregressive language model takes a provided prompt text and computes a likely next token, which is a word or a part of a word, and adds it to the text. And then it repeats the process on the extended text. The decisions it makes are based on the vast amounts of data it's seen during training. So how do we turn that generative model into a conversational assistant? We provide our system with an initial prompt that describes the assistant's persona and contains several example interactions showing how the assistant responds to questions and requests. Each user entry gets added to the prompt, and the model is invoked to generate the assistant's response, which is added to the growing transcript. The transcript acts as a sort of short-term memory, and we forget the oldest interactions over time as the conversation continues. When conversing with the assistant, you're not really talking to the language model. You're engaged in a collaborative script writing exercise with the model, where you're writing the user's lines and the model is writing the assistant's responses. This is the original prompt that we created for the programmer's assistant. The prompt is all plain text, but I've bolded the assistant's responses here to make them stand out. The prompt starts out with a prologue that sets the stage for the conversation, establishes what will follow, along with a convention for communicating code so that it will be easy for our user experience client to distinguish code from conversational interaction. Informal testing of the original prompt showed that the system was capable of carrying on a conversation, successfully answering coding questions and follow-up questions, and generating code on demand. But there were some issues. The assistant wasn't sufficiently forthcoming, often answering requests for code with replies like, "Okay, I will write the code." To deal with this, we characterized the assistant as eager and helpful, and the behavior changed. The assistant was too authoritative, answering questions with more confidence than warranted, especially when it was wrong. And it often seemed unwilling to accept corrections. Telling it that it was humble helped to address that. We also changed the examples to use expressions like "I think," and "I believe," or "I will try." Our goal was to encourage the user to treat the answer skeptically, since they're not always right. We found the assistant was turning around after answering a question and quizzing the user with additional questions, like it was teaching. We changed the prompt to explicitly prohibit that behavior, and it stopped doing that. We wanted to give the user the ability to refer to code in the code editor, and we included selected code in the conversation when the user made a chat entry using the same convention that we employed for code generated by the assistant. We added an example consultation showing the system responding to a question about selected code in the prompt. We also found that the assistant didn't respond well to requests to generate documentation. It just didn't do it right. It added comments instead of doc strings. So we added another example showing how we wanted documentation to look. The example here shows both of these features in action together, selecting a section of code and requesting documentation to be generated. So the final evolved prompt is listed in our paper, and it's too long to put on a slide. But with this prompt in place, the programmer's assistant is capable of carrying on an extended dialogue about code, including follow-up questions, requests for modifications, explanations. Multiple related questions result in consistent nomenclature in the code generation, which works out a lot better for users than multiple independent searches on Google or Stack Overflow. Despite only being exposed to a few examples in the prompt, the assistant is capable of generalizing to other skills, such as writing unit tests and describing what code does that weren't even covered in the prompt. It provides access to more knowledge and capabilities of the underlying model than were evident in the pure command completion context. Nevertheless, the assistant isn't always correct. It sometimes hallucinates wrong answers, provides incomplete responses, or claims to know an answer that it's perfectly capable of providing. We provide try again and start over functionality in our UI to deal with these problems, but they can often be addressed conversationally, as in this example, where the user points out that the assistant forgot something that it was requested, and the assistant apologizes and provides it. Then the user and the assistant discuss another shortcoming of the code, and the assistant fixes the issue. So it's difficult to provide a systematic approach to prompt engineering. It's trial and error, model dependent, it's an iterative process. Much of the work on prompt engineering now is aimed at obtaining a specific behavior from a language model, like getting it to perform translations or sentiment analysis or image generation. In our case, the focus was on establishing conversational interaction and the persona and interaction style of the assistant. The dialogue on the right is an illustration of how sensitive the behavior of the assistant is to minor details in the prompt. Because we told it was an expert automatic AI agent, it answered questions about where it was as a program, indicating that it didn't have a location beyond a process as on a set of servers located in various places on the planet. Of course, it's making all this up just based on the hint in the prompt. It also claims not to understand German and then responds to a sentence in German with a well-formed German response. My colleague Stephanie Hood will be presenting our paper describing the program as a system in more detail and the result of the user study we ran on it in session 6 of the IUI conference on Wednesday. And I'll be demonstrating it at the demo/poster session on Thursday. If you're interested, check it out.
Thank you very much. Perfect timing. Excellent. So let's open it up for questions. And let's see if there's anything in the chat. Any hands raised? If not, I'm going to just throw one question in here to start up the discussion. There's a question from Matthias. You want to go in the chat?
Sure, yeah, it just relates back to our previous discussions. So the question is if this iterative prompt engineering that you kind of been engaging in now, has that resulted in you feeling more in control of the output, or whether you feel like you understand the model better?
That's an interesting question, because in discussing this with other folks at the lab, we kind of came to the conclusion that we're sort of programming by advising, by describing what we want. It's kind of like programming, but you're not being very explicit and you don't know what the results are going to be. So it's more like cajoling, influencing, and it doesn't always work. So sometimes you try to, as with other kinds of prompting behaviors, you try one way and it doesn't give you the behavior you want, so you try another. And I've also found in working with other models that what works for one model doesn't necessarily work for another. And what you need for one model isn't necessarily what you need for another, because they'll have different biases.
And we have a question from Mary.
Yeah, thank you. So you included comments about how, but it's not always right. And I wonder if that's a bad thing. You know, the iterative process should require some sort of critical thinking. Exactly. And part of that critical thinking is recognizing that that wasn't right. And now what do I do? And so it could be, I don't know, not so much that we should try to make the AI wrong, but that we shouldn't be so concerned when it is.
If you were doing a search on Stack Overflow, you could also get wrong answers. I mean, that's a typical thing is you'll try a couple of answers you found online, from doing searches or doing a Stack Overflow search, And something may work for you and something may not, and there's an iterative process there too. So we just felt it was important that the assistant not give the impression that it had all the answers, so that people wouldn't necessarily overly trust the results. They need to be examined, and we were trying to encourage that.
Okay, and I can see we have one question by Jeremy.
Hi, yeah, great talk. So I think one thing I noticed from this domain of generating code is that it feels like there's more of a correct answer in some cases, or at least you can maybe evaluate the output of it a little bit more directly. So I don't know if you even think that's true, but it's, at least if you're trying to coach it towards this programming goal, did you kind of think about integrating the evaluation of that code in part of the process, either automatically or interactively at all?
In this prototype, we weren't even parsing the code to make sure that it parsed. We did put a formatter in to try and get the code to be sort of consistent in its output, but that's about as far as we went. If the code wouldn't parse, we couldn't format it either. So, but it is an interesting question, and depending on the user, the kind of code that you get back may be more or less appropriate for the task that they have. And one of the things that we've done a lot with it is ask it for, well, is there a different way to do this? Is there, and you can have a conversation with it about the code and which version is better or more efficient or more readable. Those sort of issues come up when working with human programmers as well.
Cool, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Steve. I'd like to invite our next speaker now. The next presentation is given by, I think it's Jabbar Rezvana, and the paper is Mary Lou on user perspectives of, okay, there it is, you can read. So Jabbar, are you going to present, right?
Yes.
Okay, let me just start my timer.
You can share you can see my screen, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, let me
Okay,
just starting my time here. Okay.
Ready, set, go.
Yes. So hello everyone. My name is Jabbar Rezvana. I'm a PhD candidate working with Dr. Meyer. And I'm going to present our paper about user perspectives of the ethical dilemmas of ownership, accountability, and leadership in human AI co-creation. So let's dive in. So first, I want to talk a little about the motivation behind this research. So current human-centered AI research emphasizes that the next frontier of AI is not just technological, but also humanistic and ethical. And unlike general human-computer interaction, human AI co-creation creates a more complex relationship between humans and AI as AI collaborates in the creative process. AI takes on human-like role of like partner, evaluator, or generator, and AI creates novel content which is blended with user contribution. So ethical dilemmas grow considerably more complex and critical in co-creative AI. Therefore, it is essential to anticipate ethical dilemmas and address them during all steps of co-creative AI. So for this study, we wanted to investigate the user perspectives and stances around the ethical dilemmas of ownership, accountability, and leadership in human AI co-creation. So to gain an initial understanding of ethical issues and considerations in human AI co-creation in a human-centered way, we need to understand users' account of technologies they envision and their expectations. So human AI co-creativity research is still formative and might still be very new or abstract to people. So in this context, we need methods that are more likely to tell us about what we don't know about the future of co-creative AI. So for this study, we used design fiction as a method to understand future users' perspective. So what is a design fiction? So design fiction represents a new technology through the world of story, and people can react to it, modify it to express their values and expectations. And it can be a fiction based on a text, video, movie, audio, or images. And design fiction acts as an intangible prototype that people can feel and experience. So for our study, we used a short narrative design fiction named Design Pal. And Design Pal is a story about a design student collaborating with a futuristic conversational co-creative AI named Design Pal that helps users in their design by inspiring users with inspiring images, generating inspiring images, and also refining users' design. So Design Pal provokes readers to think a few ethical dilemmas, including ownership, leadership, and accountability. So here's the methodology for the study. There were 2 sessions for the study. In the first session, participants read the design fiction and answered some open-ended questions through surveys. And in the second study session, participants had to participate in a follow-up focus group. So we had 18 participants, 6 males, 8 females, and 4 non-binary individuals. And we recruited both experts and also non-experts, as we wanted to know from both perspectives. So for this workshop paper, we used only focus group data for the results. And for the analysis, we used a thematic analysis. We identify multiple insightful themes about user stances and perspectives around accountability, leadership, and ownership. So let's talk about the themes. So I think the most interesting theme we found from this analysis, and this was also unsolicited, was how users perceive AI, such as collaborator versus tool, impacts many of their concerns and ethical stance. Like perceiving co-creative AI as a tool provides user with a false sense of security, and viewing AI as a partner or entity makes them more aware of ethical concerns of a co-creative AI. And this finding actually reinforces the necessity of explainability in co-creative AI too, so that users are aware of the ethical issues and risks they're exposed to while using the AI. The ownership question is a frequently asked research question in human AI co-creativity, and in our study, we found that most participants thought that users should own the co-created product, but they also thought users should acknowledge the AI. So some of them thought like both should own the product, but humans should be the first author, like any intellectual paper or property. And rest of them thought like AI should own because of its efficiency. And some of the factors that influenced their decision we found was like degree of contribution, AI roles, creativity, and initiation. So about the leadership dilemma, we found that more than half of the participants want humans to control or lead the creative process, as they think AI is there to help humans and humans are the accountable one. And a few participants wanted both of them to lead or control based on context, and the rest of them wanted AI to control because of its efficiency again. And that influential factors we found was the goal of the co-creation and the accountability. And the last one, the accountability. we found that most participants thought that humans should be the responsible one in a human AI co-creation rather than the AI. And a few participants thought the developers should be held accountable. However, many of the others thought it's not appropriate for a generative AI because here you can see one quote, like they said, like, on one hand, we want to hold product designers responsible, but it's harder in this case because co-creative AI, like the product designer doesn't generate exactly what the AI is doing. And some of the participants actually showed support for the AI, even if it acted maliciously in the design fiction, because they thought it's a young co-creative AI, generative AI, which doesn't know much, and it's humans' responsibility to teach it. Just to conclude from the study, we've identified some ethical consideration and implication for designing human-centered ethical co-creative AI. And we also found like user perception of AI influences stances of users toward ethical dilemmas in human AI co-creation. And lastly, our findings also demonstrate that the potency of AI metaphors, meaning what metaphors we use as designers and researchers when we refer to co-creative AI, and the importance of selecting the appropriate metaphor as it impacts user perception, expectations, and actions towards AI. So that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. And the floor is open to any question.
Thank you, Jeba. It's a little bit longer, so we have only 5 minutes for questions left. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hands. And we have Michael, if I see that right, and Mikal.
Michael, why don't you go first? Because I've been asking a lot of questions.
Okay, mine is quite short. Do you anticipate that this will be the result for other application and use cases?
I don't know. I got the question. Can you please repeat?
I mean, you tried it on some use case, right? On some specific use case that you showed to the people. I just wonder how general you believe these results is in the more general application or use cases.
Yeah. So in our study, like there were like 2 sessions. In the first session, it was basically survey questions, reflection questions based on the context of the design fiction that we provided them. And the focus group data was actually more generalized in the context of human AI co-creation. And for this workshop paper, we are actually using the focus group data. So we are hoping that it can be generalized in the human AI co-creation, but I feel like, you know, further research is necessary to answer that question specifically, like if that's the absolute results or not. But I think that's at least one simple first step towards getting those answers.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael.
And my question was, you spoke of people conceiving of the AI as a tool or as a collaborator. And I was wondering if those are sort of general categories with subdivisions inside of them, or if it was just those 2 possible ways of thinking.
There were like I said, like most of the participants actually thought like it's a tool, like they used, like it was the most like prevalent code we identified, like from the, you know, thematic analysis, like when talking about the co-creative AI, participants said it's a tool. They even used the analogy with a calculator, like a calculator-like tool, but as it was a more like futuristic conversational AI, it was a kind of surprising, like even people have this like preconceived idea of what an AI is. And on the other side, we saw some participants perceiving co-creative AI as you know, like collaborator or partner, or some said it kind of an entity. So yeah, like we found those two like bigger categories, but that actually affected how they responded, what their ethical stances towards different ethical dilemmas and everything. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, but do you think that with after ChatGPT came out that these findings still hold up? Because in the paper, I did not see all the design fiction dialogues that you created and showed to people, so I wasn't sure how they were designed, right? So I was just wondering what you think about the recent developments and how they influence your findings.
Yeah, I mean, the study was done before ChatGPT came out, and ChatGPT, for example, so I would use this like, so that day, like when I asked like ChatGPT, hey, are you a co-creative AI? It said like, no, I'm not a co-creative AI. Then I said like, but you just created this like creative like summary from this paper and something, and then it changes response and said like, oh yeah, I see what you meant. Maybe, yeah, I'm co-creative. And I feel like we have to have this discussion among ourselves, like what is co-creative generative AI, what is not, and like defining the boundaries, and also thinking about, like different ethical dilemmas that can happen in different kind of co-creative AI with large language models in different domains. I feel like, yes, like there is no one single answer to each of these ethical dilemmas. Like this will hold to across all these different domains, all these different co-creative AI. But I feel like, yeah, we need more conversation, more research to understand if like how large language models have, like what are the implications of large language models on human AI co-creation.
I have another question, but I would hold it back and drop it for you in the channel, because I think we need to move on to the next presentation. Thank you very much. Great talk, Deborah.
Thank you.
And next speaker, I believe, is Justin, but I'm not 100% sure. Justin, will you present the paper with Michael, Jessica, and Stephanie?
Yes, I will. And Zoom is complaining I didn't give it all the right preferences. Uh-oh. Please excuse me. Come on. Okay, I'll be back.
While we're waiting for him, I just wanted to chime in on that last question. The design fiction acted very much like what ChatGPT does. It was a design fiction of the future, not of what was available at the time when we wrote the fiction. So I think some of these ethical issues are certainly still relevant. I think what we've got with ChatGPT is it's much easier to study. You don't have to go to fiction.
It's true. Yes, no more fiction. Scary.
Okay. So at least
Okay,
one person needs to, yeah, at least one person needs to have the, problems with screen sharing and everything.
It was too smooth already, right? I'll start my timer now.
Yeah, I'm starting mine also. All right. So hi, everyone. Justin Weiss, IBM Research. I'm going to talk about work that we've done to identify some general design principles for generative AI applications. We have 7 design principles. I have 7 minutes. I'm going to fly through this, so I apologize. But what this is all about is we're trying to identify the concepts that designers of AI systems need to understand because it's generative AI, which is very different from how designers of AI systems are used to thinking about AI that maybe makes decisions or makes recommendations. And kind of the unique characteristic of generative AI systems is this idea that we're calling generative variability. This is the idea that every time you push the generate button, you get different results back each time. And this is actually a big problem because it violates a core tenet of good UX design, which is consistency, right? Every time I push the print button in my UI, I expect to see the print dialog. I don't expect to see something different. So how do we design for this? So we have this set of design principles, and for each design principle, I'll talk through a couple different strategies that we have for how to cope with these issues. So the first principle here is about designing for multiple outputs. So as we just saw, generative algorithms, they can create multiple things. How do we handle this? We can do things like provide a version history. So every artifact that a user creates, just keep track of it in some kind of history, because chances are you push that generate button, you're not going to be able to recreate that thing that you might have liked, several iterations ago. And this example is from DALL-E. It keeps track of everything that you've generated in the system. Another way to handle multiple outputs is to help users visualize the differences amongst these outputs. So the picture I'm showing here is from a prototype that we made of a code translation system. And with code translation, these systems need to produce multiple outputs in order to kind of produce the right one. And these outputs tend to be similar to each other. So we were thinking, okay, why don't we just show the differences amongst these multiple outputs as kind of a way to help the user understand what's the same, what is sort of a confident translation versus where was there some disagreement and the human might need to go in and sort of pick the right answer. Last idea here is the idea of curation and annotation. So as your system is generating things, let users mark which ones they're interested in or curate a set of things that they're interested in. So this is a screenshot from the IBM COVID-19 Molecule Explorer. It generates a whole bunch of molecules and has some features for kind of helping users identify which ones of those look interesting that they want to continue with further. Design principle number 2 is designing for imperfection. And this is the idea that these generative algorithms, they don't always produce perfect artifacts that are sort of flawless or correct in some sense. So how do we cope with this? Well, as we just talked about multiple outputs, this is actually a strategy for handling imperfection. This is a very small screenshot of 5 different code translations. And, with these kinds of systems, you really do have to get them to produce multiple things in order to find the one that's kind of correct and passes some unit tests. Another way to handle imperfection is to just turn it into a co-creative process. So this is a screenshot from GAN-Paint, and Hendrik is on this call. Hendrik was the one who built this. And this system was about using a GAN to generate images, but then the user had some drawing tools where they could edit those images and mark sections of the images that they wanted to change and kind of send it back to the system to regenerate something new. And back and forth you go in this co-creative process to ultimately result in the image that you want. Third idea here is about evaluating your domain-specific artifacts. So again, going back to the use case of molecules, when you have a system that's generating molecules, you might be able to do some domain-specific evaluation on those things. So molecules, we have molecular simulators that maybe they can compute some properties of those molecules and bring it back into your UX to show users, hey, this is an interesting domain metric like the water solubility of this molecule to help people make decisions as to what's like a promising candidate that I want to work with. Final idea is to do things in a sandbox kind of environment. If your system is producing sort of imperfect outputs like source code, don't just commit that into the user's workspace. Maybe, in this example, we have this copy paste boundary. Let the user review the code, figure out, is it what I'm really looking for? Do I need to generate something different before the user commits to putting that into the thing they're working on? Principle 3 is about designing for human control. This can happen at a couple different levels. So one is some controls are just generic, like how many outputs do you produce in your system, or what's the random seed, as we saw earlier today. Some of these controls are going to be technology specific. So if it's something like an encoder decoder model, 2 years ago at this workshop, we saw this idea of semantic sliders where you can sort of manipulate inside of a latent space the pictures showing these 3D animal shapes, and certain of the latent dimensions corresponded to things like the size of the head or the size of the torso, and you can just turn that into a UI slider. And also technology specific. There's a lot going around with just prompt engineering for transformer models, right? Things like chain of thought prompting. And finally, there might be domain-specific controls, which again, molecules, you might be able to set some constraints on domain-specific aspects like the water solubility or the molecular weight, or if it's code, you might have some control over the runtime performance, the memory consumption. Principle number 4 is about designing for exploration. So how do we help users explore a space and sort of be inspired? Obviously, multiple outputs, controls, yes, you should have them. Sandbox environments that just let users play around and explore ideas, absolutely. And also visualizations. So one of these ideas comes from a paper from this workshop last year about expressive range coverage analysis to try and articulate what is the space of possible things that can be generated and where you, the user, was able to create artifacts within that space. And then also the talk that we started off the workshop with, right, with Stable Walk and showing this sort of exploratory space of what can be generated with this model. Principle 5 is about designing for mental models. So first of all, orienting your users to this idea of generative variability and that the system may produce imperfect outputs and it's going to produce different things every time you click that generate button. That's super critical to communicate to users. And also this idea of like, how do you present the role of the AI? Is it a tool? Is it a partner? As we just saw in the previous talk, right? These are important questions to answer because it's going to help set users' expectations for how to use the tool and what it can do for them. Principle 6 is about designing for explanations. First of all, communicating the capabilities of your system, the limitations of the system. ChatGPT kind of does this when you first load it. And also helping create accurate mental models. So this screenshot comes, from another prototype where we were just highlighting tokens that a code translation system was not confident in, and we found out that those highlights actually help people understand how the system worked. They served as explanations. Last principle, in our paper, we call this design against harms. We've done some thinking and felt like, let's do more positive reframing. So we call this one design responsibly. I don't really need to motivate the importance of this. The news does that with all these crazy headlines going around. But really, what is the state of the world here is we're still trying to understand what is the taxonomy or what is the space of potential harms that these generative algorithms can cause. There's a great paper by Weidinger that kind of outlines this taxonomy of harms of language models. We've been kind of thinking about this and evolving a little bit and kind of came up with these 3 categories. There are a set of issues about the inputs to the algorithm. There's a set of issues around the outputs of the algorithm, and there's a set of issues, sort of general governance of how the algorithms are used and trained and applied in real world problems. So that's my talk. I think I was at 7 minutes. And for discussion, I'm really just looking for feedback, like, what do you like in this framework? What's missing? Are there important principles that we've just totally overlooked? And we're really starting to think about, not just design principle, but how do we turn this into something actionable for a designer who's building a real AI system? So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Justin. Great talk. And we have about 5 minutes left for questions. And there's the first one coming from Katie.
Hey, sorry, jumped in there really fast. I really like this talk. I was also wondering if you could share your slides, because they're great.
Oh,
I'd love to look at them later.
Yeah, sure.
If that's something you're comfortable with. But
Yeah.
my comment / question, to me, like principles 1 and 4 feel really similar. And maybe you could speak to what you see as the difference between them.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think 4 is definitely about use cases where it's ideation or inspiration or trying to explore possibilities, like Philipp's talk, at the top of the workshop of just give me inspiration for different ways I might design a chair. I think what that doesn't take into account is I'm looking for the molecule that satisfies a set of properties, or I'm looking for the source code that implements, the functionality, where there's some sort of objective quality that you're trying to hit. And you just might need to keep invoking the model in order to hit that quality, right? Like code translation is notorious for this. I want to translate a function from Java to Python using, state-of-the-art neural machine translation. I have to invoke the model 10, 15, 30, 50, 100 times maybe to get one output that passes my unit tests. And for, machine learning researchers, that's what they do, right? There's this metric that, they use to just generate like 50 things. And if any one of them passes the tests, then yay, the model did a good job. Great for the model, horrible user experience. Users are not going to review 50 things to find the one that works for them. And in real software engineering, they don't have unit tests to do all those evaluations. They have to look at the code themselves. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess just to say it back to you, like you kind of see them as slightly different use cases where like the multiple outputs is you're searching for the right, quote unquote, right one. Whereas exploration is more, you don't know what the right thing is. You have to kind of, there might be lots of right
and
things
that's a good, that's a good distinction to make. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more question by Matthias.
Yeah, thanks. Great talk. I love these design principles and this framework. It's a good job. I had a question around number 6. I think you said something about that you need to design for accurate mental models. Is that correct? I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that and whether it actually is possible to create accurate mental models around some of these things, because I feel like for some of these large language models, for instance, we don't really understand them yet, exactly what they are and how they work and what they can do, really. So then, do you have any advice on how to think about that, how to create these accurate mental models?
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. And now that I think about it, I would probably scratch the word accurate and replace it with useful. Which, we've had some kind of internal discussions on the team. What is more important, that you actually understand how the large language model works, or just your understanding leads you to work with it successfully? It's probably more important that you understand how to work with it successfully. Like, what is the right way to prompt Stable Diffusion to produce the kind of image I'm looking for? And I've learned these keywords like photorealistic or whatever, and as a way of steering the model, versus, do I really need to understand how a diffusion model works, and that it starts with this, noise layer that it's sort of refining to produce an image? Yeah, so I that's a really good point. I would probably strike the word accurate and say useful. How do you do that? Active area of research.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, useful is probably better, and that can be problematic in itself, but it's a design principle. They're not meant to be.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, there's another question, but that needs to be really the last one. Simon. And then we have
thank you. This is very helpful for me. 2 thoughts. One is HCI started with design principles, right? High-level design guidelines, but often designers struggle to understand how to implement them. So I find these extremely helpful, but I think a design library is going to be extremely helpful too. And your examples really are very helpful for designers to think from, as opposed to just the abstract principles. So that's great. My second one is, a group of 10-year-olds doing some ideation about a project in design is obviously very different from a group of master's students trying to do some code translation. So I think use contexts and different are going to be so important here as to which of these principles we want to see coming to the fore.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that might be something we want to think more about, is, do some of these principles really only apply to certain use cases, right? Like the comment that, Katie made earlier, is maybe some of these really only apply when you're trying to produce the sort of perfect artifact that satisfies some objective criteria, versus other principles. It's really just, you're exploring a space, you're looking for creative ideas and ideation and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's really good feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know, Juan, you have another question. Would you mind posting it in the Slack channel? Because I think we are out of time for this session. I just wanted to thank all the speakers again and give them a round of virtual applause. This was a great session. And handing it over back to Mary.
Gosh, sorry, I was running off to get the program again for everybody, but thank you for this session. That was really great. I am going to hand it to Justin because we're about to start our panel discussion, which is the last session of the day. And while he's taking that over, I will put the link in the chat again so that you can see who our panelists are. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary. So it's me again. So we're going to have, I believe, first panel discussion of HAI Gen. So that's very, very exciting. And the topic we have is the implications of large language models on human AI co-creativity. And we have 4 panelists. So we have Katie Giro from Columbia University. We have Kaz Grace from University of Sydney. We have Jeba Rezwana from University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And we have a mystery guest. I'll let you think a second of who that might be. So the general way that this panel discussion is going to work is each panelist is going to have about 3-ish minutes to introduce themselves and give a position statement on our topic. And then we're going to use the rest of the time, which isn't much, about 15 minutes. First, I'm going to provide some space for the panelists to react to each other, and then I'll open it up to the audience for questions. And, you know, as we have been doing, please just raise your hand and I'll call on you. So, topic of our panel is what are the implications of large language models on human AI co-creativity? And I wanted to start with our mystery guest. Let's see what they have to say. But Philipp kind of did this in the first talk, so stole a little of my thunder here. So I asked ChatGPT this exact question, and this is what it came up with. And I actually thought this was, you know, it was finding some interesting points, right? There's, you know, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but there's, you know, an aspect on enhancing creativity. There's an aspect on improving collaboration, reducing bias, changing the role of creatives, of people who do creative work. And ethical considerations, as we saw, I guess, 2 talks ago now. So that's the AI's response, but I'm very interested in the human response. And I would like to begin with Jeba. And I will set a little timer for 3 minutes.
Can I? Okay, I thought like I can share my screen.
Oh, yes, you can. Absolutely, you can. Let me stop
Yeah, it's
sharing.
just
There you go.
one single slide. I thought like, okay. So hello everyone. I think I already introduced myself. I'm a PhD candidate. My research, I work with Dr. Meyer, and my research interest focuses on human-computer interaction in the subfields of human AI co-creation, mostly in the interaction design part. And I also work in the ethical human-centered AI domain. So, I will talk about along the lines of my paper today. So as AI becomes more personal and large language models become more popular, ethical issues become increasingly common in human AI co-creation. People tend to change their attitude towards a technology when it becomes more personal. In fact, one of my previous studies has shown that when a co-creative AI becomes personal to users, perceived trustworthiness and reliability increases, which leads to ethical issues. Therefore, our researchers have a responsibility to consider the ethical consequences and implications of large language models on human AI co-creation. And we are seeing this hype around AI built on large language models such as ChatGPT and Google's BARD. And many people are thinking of ChatGPT as the ultimate intelligence. However, in reality, as generative models, they have many ethical issues actually. Like AI hallucination is one of them, which occurs when the AI model generates output that deviates from what would be considered normal. We see ChatGPT making things up, which is not very bad in many creative setting, but it might be very risky in some domains that are based on facts. For example, creative problem solving maybe, or if you're working in the research question generation, for example, it generates paper that do not exist. And additionally, there are bias in the training data. For instance, when prompted to write a function to check if someone will be a good scientist, ChatGPT actually generated a code that suggests that only white males can be good scientists. And moreover, there are copyright issues when using large language models, as they do not cite their sources, which means it might use your copyrighted patent without even attributing you. And that might be an issue in human AI co-creation. Furthermore, it's important to consider who will be the owner of the co-created product and who should be in control in a specific human AI co-creation based on different factors. And increasing explainability in AI and AI literacy among ordinary people is also essential for to make the humans more aware of the ethical issues that can arise from a human AI co-creation. And also, I feel like it's we need to, as researchers, we need to think about how responsibilities should be distributed between humans and AI, because we talk about building ethical AI, but there are responsibilities on users too, and ethical values that should be discussed. So lastly, I just wanted to say further research is needed to develop guidelines for designing AI ethics, ethical co-creative AI, so that the next frontier of co-creative AI is not just only smart, technological, but also ethical and humanistic. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeba. Now I'd like to pick on Kaz.
Hi, folks. I'm Kaz Grace. I'm a senior lecturer in design at the University of Sydney, which means I'm really glad this panel is happening at the end of the session when I've had a chance to wake up. I'm really interested in co-creative AI support in the early phases of design and other creative processes in what we might call a conceptual exploration. And I think this is something that's come up a lot today. We talked about it in the very last talk where Justin and Katie were talking about this notion of exploration when you don't know what you're looking for. And also at the very beginning of the day when Philipp talked about this idea that less is more. We want the AI to do less because that gives us more ambiguity, more room for interpretation, maybe more room for inspiration. I think this is a really key point to the future of co-creative AI in general and language models in specific, because we all know that real world design problems, it doesn't matter whether they're in health, tech, engineering, etc., are by definition ill-formed, underspecified, and complex. Problem framing and problem solving are required concurrently. They're a co-evolution, as Mary Lou famously put it a while ago. In art, different words are used. You wouldn't catch many artists talking about problem solving, but there's still this notion of constructing the space to play in, not just in searching it. And this is where I think large language models, specifically their capacity to very subtly contextualize meaning, come in. If you listen to creative people collaborating, you look at a dialogue between human creators, they're often actually constructing a shared language specific to that design task. You might see two musicians and one would listen and say, no, it needs to be bigger, it needs to be bigger. But that word doesn't mean its dictionary meaning because of their discussions to this point, because of their construction of that situation. They have this emerging shared, or at least mostly shared, meaning about what they're looking for, expressed through highly contextualized language. So we've talked a lot today, and sort of feel this talking a lot about dialogic conditioning, sort of going beyond prompt engineering, which happens once at the very start of an interaction, to this dialogic interaction as you start to shape the direction that a language model or a text image model or whatever is taking. So I'm interested in what happens when we go from dialogic conditioning to govern behavior. I say this, now you say this, or I say this, now you draw this, to dialogic conditioning to govern meaning. So how can we go up a level and actually start saying, well, when I say this, what I actually mean is that. So this is where people, creative people, discuss the potential situated meaning of a word or concept as a way to express their goals or an aesthetic, the vibe that they're looking for. In a human-centered design context, you might go backwards and forwards and then really settle on an experience statement, and you drive the product or service design process from there. Typically, that statement involves highly subjective, contextualized meanings of words. If you just look at it without understanding that context, without sort of being in that team and having that meaning, it might not capture that. So I think if we can leverage some of these capacities of large language models to capture very subtle contextual meaning, then we can go from prompt-based generation to creative dialogue, which would mean sort of bidirectional influence on what we each mean. The human would influence the AI's meaning, and the AI would influence the human's meaning. And those linguistic sort of milestones or linguistic sort of exchanges might help shape the conceptual exploration in a more creative way. A little bit abstract, I'm afraid, but that's what I think is the next interesting thing in language models in co-creative AI.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you, Kaz. And Katie, you're up.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Katie. Actually just finished my PhD at Columbia, so I'm now a postdoc at Harvard. Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Very happy, extremely pleased. My PhD was on creative writing assistance, so like using the language models for writing tasks. What I'm working on now at Harvard is like a project I'm loosely calling Language Forks and Merges, which is more about visualizing the output space of a language model. But what I wanted to talk about today was about authenticity in co-creative settings. So issues of authenticity and kind of the related issues of provenance and authorship and agency come up a lot when I've studied like co-creative writing, and I think come up a lot whenever you like look at co-creative tasks. And I found that participants in these studies tend to bring up issues of authenticity kind of on their own. You don't have to prompt it. They want to talk about it. And I've always been really curious, like, but what do we really mean by this word authenticity? Like, what are people really talking about? And so I've been looking into different ways that people measure authenticity in psychology, and to try to deepen my thinking around what authenticity means. And so there's kind of a bunch of different ideas, but I'm going to go over three that I think are interesting. The first is this idea of self-congruence. So sometimes you feel inauthentic if you behave in a way that you feel you don't normally behave. So you have some sense that your behavior should be congruent throughout time. And when you do something kind of strange based on your behavior, you might feel inauthentic. A second idea for authenticity has to do with intrinsic motivation. So we feel more authentic if we're doing something that we feel is intrinsically motivated. And if we're doing something that perhaps we've been forced to do or asked to do for some reason, we might feel less authentic when we're doing that task. A third one that I'm really interested in is this idea of attributional consternation, where you might feel inauthentic when you just don't understand your behavior. If you don't know how to attribute what you did to some understanding of yourself or your personality or your beliefs or your attitudes, you might feel inauthentic, and it kind of comes from this confusion about where your behavior came from. There's a couple different ideas, but I think there are three interesting ideas. They have a little bit of overlap. I think the first two, this idea of like incongruence and the idea of lacking intrinsic motivation, are probably coming up because a lot of co-creative studies are lab settings. So we're kind of asking someone to do something that maybe they wouldn't do on their own. So perhaps it makes sense that they're like, this isn't my typical behavior, and I feel a little inauthentic in doing it. But this last idea about attributional consternation, where we're kind of confused about why we did something, might be really interesting, even in people who are interacting with co-creative systems on their own, where they might be unsure, kind of, if they're incorporating something from an AI, they might feel like they can't really explain where that came from. And that might be triggering a sense of inauthenticity. So I don't have any kind of strong conjectures other than I want to think about this idea more deeply, mostly because I just think it's really fascinating. And I think it's something that's going to come up a lot as these systems get more powerful.
All right. Thank you, Katie. So let me pause a little bit. Katie, Kaz, Jeba, do you have any reactions to what your co-panelists have said? Sounds good. It all sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, oh, sorry. Yes.
Oh, I was going to say, I thought Kaz's was made me think a lot about something I've seen in my own studies about writers sometimes struggling to express their intentions. Like you're talking about needing this like shared language. And I think a lot of times, I don't know, I've heard writers talk about sometimes they don't want to talk to anyone else about their ideas because it can really shift where their project is going. And so they kind of keep a project to themselves in the early stages until they formulated it to a point where they feel like they can express it to someone else. So your idea of the kind of dialogic also like early on in the stage made me like wonder about how sometimes people actually maybe don't want feedback when like ideas are very fragile.
That's a really good point. I mean, the worst thing in the world is great advice that you don't want to follow. And so maybe there's a right time and a right way. And I think Simon was talking about sort of use cases in the macro level, 10-year-olds discussing a design versus experts doing code translation. I think even within an individual, there's where you are when you first have an idea and it's a really fragile green shoot that will be knocked over by someone else's idea. They go, oh, that's cool. Have you tried this? And I'm like, no, I don't really want that. But when maybe it's just a little bit more stable, that's maybe where these technologies could be more useful. But then that is just conjecture. We should try it out. We maybe should trample some green shoots in a safe setting and figure it out.
Yeah, I also actually thinking about what Kaz just said, like about like how we can create this like, you know, creative conversation, a two-way conversation between human and AI, which actually also I saw from one of my study that like this two-way conversation between human and AI actually increase the it made the collaboration more positively engaging and more collaborative. So I was thinking like how this like large language models can be used to, you know, incorporate this kind of conversation in different co-creative settings.
So there's something that I kind of picked out of Kaz, your statement about can large language models capture contextual meaning, and that really resonated with me because, you know, a lot of the work that we've been doing, it's been conversation with large language models, but it's kind of grounded in the context of some artifact, right? And at least, you know, the examples I showed in my talk, it's, you know, source code, right? And so the artifact is source code, but we found a lot of value. You know, it's not just like ChatGPT, let me ask you some general questions. It's more like, here's the thing that I'm trying to work on. Here's my context. Let me select some source code and ask a question about that thing, and actually getting responses back that are very useful about it, right? You know, select some code and ask a question like, please explain what this is doing, or please write some documentation for that thing. So that idea really resonated with me.
I think that it's really important to note that a dialogue can be both dialogue through a medium and dialogue about a medium. And that obviously in the real world, there's also body language and other sort of non-traditionally linguistic constructions that go into a creative dialogue. I mean, you can just be talking on a stage and you can read the audience's body language and know that you're missing the room, right? And I would argue that that's a creative dialogue too, in a sense. And obviously, we're going to be able to capture a tiny fraction of that stuff. But I will say that there's there's a lot of research out there in sociology about what dialogue is and how it's constructed and what are the components of it. And I'm just sort of starting a project at the moment with my collaborator, Ollie Bound from UNSW, where we're sort of trying to mine that space a little bit and see what's known out there in the way dialogue generally works and how we might be able to leverage it in co-creative AI.
I think you're kind of, the way you're talking about it in terms of dialogue and shared vocabulary, or like lack of shared vocabulary, actually helps me articulate what I find kind of frustrating and not fun about interacting with large language models, which is there's a big kind of learning curve or activation energy to explain what I'm trying to do. And I find that I'm like uninterested or unwilling to do that for ChatGPT, like partly because it's hard and I would have a much easier time talking to a person because I know, or like a person that I know and I have a relationship with, I know how to do it. But also I'm now reflecting, like, it's a lot of work that you put into making yourself understood. And I feel like with a language model, there's no like reciprocation, or like, it's hard for me to see kind of the long-term benefit of it. Whereas like, I feel like you get this, you're talking with a person at a party and at some point you're like, I just feel like we're not understanding each other and we're strangers and whatever, I'm just gonna like leave it alone, like it's not worth it. Whereas you meet someone at a party who really gets you and suddenly you're like exchanging ideas, whatever, you know. And so you're just making me reflect, like that's kind of why I don't like ChatGPT. It's too much work and I'm not sure the work is worth it. Like, why would I invest in explaining myself to OpenAI? You know, they're just going to steal my data.
Right.
Where I'm like, I'm very willing to invest in a person.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to build on that. And I also want to go back to something that Jeba said in her opening statement about AI becoming more personal. And this actually, Jeba, this came up in your talk, and then I took a screenshot of your picture and I dropped it into my talk, right? About what is the role of the AI? Is it a tool? Is it a collaborative partner? And the question is, I think it's really about maybe anthropomorphization. Should we be treating this as sort of a human-like entity, right? When we interact with a large language model, should we think of it as I don't know, Sydney, right, with Bing, or should we really just be treating this as an impersonal tool that we don't ascribe human characteristics to?
I mean, like when I think about it, like, I mean, I feel like there is still no, I don't have any answer to that yet. Like, should we, you know, should we like anthropomorphize it, or should we just use that as a tool? So I feel like that's what my, you know, statement was. Like, we need to think about that. And sometimes, like I said, we think we should do this or that, but we don't actually think about what, you know, experts think, what actual users think, and what designers think, and make this, you know, holistic conversation, and finding out something from that conversation, like what we actually want to do, how we actually want to do something about it. And I feel like because that was a like workshop paper, I just actually presented ownership, leadership, and accountability themes. But actually from my study, I found that users actually, like participants, they said like they don't like when the co-creative AI is too personal, because in my design fiction, it was like a personalized, it has this persona. And they thought like it could be, you know, it felt like, you know, there's this term, like when it's too human-like, it can be creepy, like uncanny valley and everything. So the participants thought it like they are not yet ready, I feel like, for thinking that co-creative AI is a like another persona or another collaborator. So I feel like, yeah, we need to think about it and think about how we should go about this. Yeah.
Excellent. We've just got a couple minutes left, but I want to maybe open it up to the audience if anyone has a question or topic of discussion. Oh, all right. Simon, go for it.
Thank you, everybody. That was really stimulating. One for Katie. I'm just wondering whether we can frame the current panic about academic integrity in education as it's really kind of fumbling for some notion of authenticity, perhaps. This is one way of explaining how to students what it means, what it feels like to actually work with integrity with AI, as opposed to just panicking about the kids who are going to cheat. So I thought that was very provocative. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and speaks, I think, to like the complexity or like multifacetedness of this idea of authenticity, right? Which like is also like integrity and provenance and showing your work. But I think that's a really good, I don't know, I've seen something recently about like figuring out how to watermark AI outputs. And it's like, well, really, we should just like have authenticity stamps for human outputs. Like that's way simpler in a way, and kind of speaks to your point about like figuring, like teaching people or having people learn about what integrity means.
Great. Any final questions from audience members?
We are right on time.
We're right on time.
Closing. So if you're ready, Justin, I'll do a quick closing.
Yeah, well, let me just close out the panel by thanking Jeba, Katie, and Kaz so much for your participation, and thank you everyone for stimulating discussions this whole workshop. So back to you, Mary.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming and hanging in there until the end. I think that recent developments have made our work even more important than it was before, if that's even possible. I think the focus on creativity and co-creativity really touches on something that is essentially human, this being creative, that we're not always in search of the right answer, but we are in search of doing things that haven't been done before, of standing out, of being different, of expressing ourselves in creative ways. And as we see AI starting to do something that looks vaguely similar, there's so much research to be done. And so I wanted to end with the idea of creating community around this. I don't know if you noticed, but one of the goals of this workshop, and we've been running it for 4 years, is to create that community. So I'll be in touch with you to see if it's okay if we actually share the participant list, or if you don't want your name on it for some reason. I think we should get to know each other, not just for these 4 hours, but try and keep in touch, try and attend some of the same workshops and conferences, and just keep this conversation going, because it really is important, more important than ever, especially with all of the issues that we've seen raised today. And I will close by thanking everyone and asking anyone, if you're running something in the near future that this community might be interested in, please drop it in the chat now or get in touch with me and I'll broadcast it to everyone. I know Michael's got something going on at Chi, but anything else that's going on that you think might bring people in. And it's almost like a call to action. We are not enough. You should go out and convince your students and your colleagues, this is where you should be looking. This is a hot spot right now. And thank you everyone for coming. Any last minute comments or notes? Okay, well, thank you. I'll be in touch.
Thank you. What a great day.
Very excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, you. You were excellent.
Thank you.
Very seamless. It was great.
Bye.